The Fate of Austria. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 176. Smart Man. Ottoman Empire, Istanbul. Hello, my dear Sultan. I'm Clemens Wenzel von Metternich, Prime Minister of the Austrian Empire. It is an honor to meet you. Hello, Mr. Metternich. It's an honor to meet you, but you are a little older than I thought. Majid said. Metternich was not too surprised by Majid's teasing. After all, the young Sultan's teacher was Viscount Canning Stratford. The British planner of weakening Austria's influence was his cousin George Canning. The relationship between Metternich and Canning can be said to be extremely bad. George Canning claimed to be the founder of the New World Order, and his number one enemy was Metternich. The feud between the two started over a woman. The young Canning fell in love with a married woman, but the noble lady fell in love with the more mature and steady Metternich. The noble lady later committed suicide because she could not be with Metternich, but when her husband was packing up his wife's belongings, he found Canning's letter to the noble lady. The noble lady's husband asked for a duel with Canning. The latter won the duel and killed the other party, but he was not happy at all. Instead, he regarded Metternich as his lifelong enemy. Viscount Stratford was Canning's cousin. He knew about the grievances between his cousin and Metternich, and attributed his cousin's mysterious death to Metternich. It was unusual for Canning to suddenly fall ill and die after only 100 days in office. Viscount Stratford knew that his cousin had always been physically strong, and at that time Canning had just completed 2 diplomatic victories that could go down in history, and was at the peak of his life. After meeting Metternich, his condition suddenly worsened. Viscount Stratford felt that all this was Metternich's fault. But in fact, the meeting between Metternich and Canning was just a routine matter to send blessings to the new British Prime Minister. Apart from the personal grievances between Metternich and Canning, the reason why Majid showed such contempt was more due to the decline in the strength and international status of the Austrian Empire. Of course, the first step to becoming a qualified diplomat is to abandon personal honor and disgrace, but this does not mean that he will accept the other party's insults. After all, negotiations must be on an equal footing to be established. If your attitude is too low, it will be difficult to succeed. Dear Sultan, you are more naive than I thought. Metternich's words were not only a response to the other party, but also pointed out the naive idea of the Ottomans that Britain alone could solve the problem at hand. It is also a reminder that the Ottoman Sultan should not be so frivolous as a ruler, and it is also a signal that Austria is not a country that can be insulted lightly. But the other party didn't seem to hear it, so Majid spoke. I think you're young is a better word, and if you're not good at English, I'll speak French too. Majid's words made Metternich, who spoke with a London accent, a little embarrassed. He did not dislike the other person's country accent, but the other party disliked him. Metternich wanted to laugh, but he held it back, because it was rude after all. No, I insist that I did not use the wrong word. By the way, I would like you to speak German, if possible. Majid obviously did not speak German, and the other party knew that he was not sincere. But the other party did not leave or give up immediately, which meant that Metternich did have important matters to discuss during his trip. Majid was not a complete idiot. He knew that the British did not really help the Ottoman Empire, and sooner or later they would show their fangs like Russia. Now you might as well listen to the Austrians' conditions. If the conditions are not good, then don't agree. Anyway, there is nothing to lose. Your Majesty, Prime Minister, honesty will be beneficial to both of us. Majid had a good idea to take advantage of the contradictions between the great powers to make profits and gain time and space for his own development. But he misjudged one thing. One of the countries you rule is a place called Bosnia, where Catholics are being persecuted, so our government has lodged a solemn protest. Bosnia. It's not that Majid doesn't know this place, let alone that Catholics have been persecuted there for a long time, but it has been persecuted for hundreds of years, and you, Austria, are just mentioning it now. He also said that he was not taking advantage of the situation. However, Turkey and Austria have a centuries-old feud, and it is reasonable for Austria to add insult to injury. But why come to Istanbul to talk about this matter? They could simply send troops to occupy Bosnia. Majid did not believe that the thousands of Bosnian garrison and militiamen could stop Austria's 100,000 strong army. At first, the Ottomans thought that Nordsoy's army only had 50,000 troops, but later intelligence revealed that it was actually an army of 100,000 troops. There are 70,000 Ottoman troops near Serbia, but their mission is to defend Serbia and will not rescue Bosnia. For the Ottoman Empire, Bosnia was an insignificant land. As long as Serbia was not lost, it would have little impact on the Ottoman Empire. Yes, it is the Bosnia region adjacent to the Austrian Empire. We hope you can hand over this region to us. Metternich continued. This further confirmed Majid's guess, and he also breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the Austrians did not attack Serbia, otherwise the Ottoman Empire would really have trouble sleeping and eating. Russia is in the north, Persia is in the east, Egypt is in the south, and Austria is in the west. If Austria were to take control of Serbia again, the situation of the Ottoman Empire would be even worse. But Metternich did not finish his words. To this end, our country will help your vassal state, Serbia, to solve the problems of banditry and rebellion on its territory. This sentence is telling Majid, your garrison on Serbian soil can leave, otherwise you will be treated as a bandit problem. Majid's mind was racing. Starting a war with Austria? This is certainly not a wise move. Give up Serbia and Bosnia. The tigers and wolves around him will definitely become more unscrupulous, unable to fight or make peace. He thought of the Russians. The Russians could be used to counterbalance the Austrians. Didn't the Tsar claim to be the protector of all Slavs? Master, Prime Minister, you know, we are allies of Russia and should protect the Slavs in our territory. Dear Sultan, I know what you are worried about and what you rely on. The Russians have reached an agreement with us. Austria will not annex Serbia. Please rest assured. Our country also hopes that you can become our allies. It's good for both countries. Metternich's promise left Majid at a loss. He originally thought that Austria would be wary of the power of the Russians, and that the interests of the two countries were in a competitive relationship and could not be reconciled. Unexpectedly, the two sides had already reached some kind of agreement with each other. Majid did not believe in the Austrians' promises. Now he could only hope that the British would defeat Egypt as soon as possible and then support him in maintaining the territorial integrity of the Ottoman Empire. At this time, a chamberlain hurriedly ran in, and Majid immediately frowned. However, the chamberlain didn't seem to see it and just said in a confused manner, coming. They are coming. Who's coming? The British fleet. Majid pushed the waiter away and ran to the window in great joy. Chapter 177 Daily Life. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Thalia was doing squats against the wall alone, while Franz was lying on Ajani's lap. To supervise her, Franz likes to rub against Ajani's thigh, and the latter likes to lick the former. They both get what they want. Since Ajani's arrival, Thalia's body shape has rapidly developed in the direction of a German aunt. On the one hand, it's because Franz is giving more and more tasks, and these two guys will eat sweets like crazy. When they are together, Ajani's fat has gone where it should go, and Thalia's fat is as free as herself. Franz decided to exercise them for his own eyes. 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, 50 squats, and running around the royal gardens with Franz are mandatory every day, and then there will be random punishments for every mistake. In 2 years, their figures have improved a lot, and their waistcoat lines, peach buttocks, and beauty spots are all there. Franz's training was relatively easy for Ajani. After all, she had dancing skills and had practiced assassination. For Thalia, it was a very painful process. Although she looked tall and powerful, her physical strength was astonishingly poor. She had to sit down and rest once after running a few hundred meters. After a long period of training, something magical happened. Thalia completely flattened her already skinny breasts. But she didn't care, and Franz couldn't demand anything more. Ajani also said goodbye to her corset completely. Franz originally planned to give Ajani the new bra as a reward, but Mrs. Sophie got there first. Ajani herself fell in love with this kind of underwear, and she was the first person to start improving this kind of underwear. After dozens of modifications and Franz's suggestions, this new style of underwear is getting closer and closer to modern underwear, but the style is still from the 19th century. After that, Franz took a journey to exchange experiences with Mrs. Sophie again and again. With Franz's unremitting efforts, he finally attracted Mrs. Sophie's interest in fashion design and modeling. Mrs. Sophie's business talent and political vision are very poor. Instead of letting her make trouble for herself, it is better to let her do something she already likes. She can completely use her connections to sell new underwear between the nobility and the royal family. After all, the cost of new underwear at this time is still relatively high, and the aristocrats are more likely to accept new designs than the poor. The most important thing is that they can be sold as luxury goods. Similarly, the rubies, sapphires, pearls, ivory and other luxury goods collected by the Austrian church from Zenla were also handed over to Mrs. Sophie. Managing luxury goods relies on patience, vision, and branding, which Mrs. Sophie possesses. At the same time, Franz cannot find a better brand than the Habsburg family. Mrs. Sophie was born in the Wittelsbach family. Her family was rich in beauties and foolish kings. 4 of her 5 sisters became queens of the country. Only the youngest sister Maria Ludovica Wilhelmina married a duke from the royal branch, who was later the mother of Princess Sissi. Therefore, Mrs. Sophie is very well connected in the European royal family, and she is willing to show off these jewelry and designs everywhere, just like she often shows off her children. At this time, Mrs. Sophie had 3 sons and 1 daughter. Parents would always unconsciously favor the eldest son and the youngest daughter. Franz seemed a little weird, so the well-behaved and sensible Maria became her favorite, to show off of toys. Maria Anna is Franz's youngest sister. She is chubby and very cute, but because of her overindulgence, she often eats random things, and often suffers from diarrhea. Franz specially prepared a box of allicin capsules for her, and asked Mrs. Sophie to always carry them with her. In 1730, pharmacists in Vienna began to make capsules from starch, but there were still some differences between the capsules at this time and modern capsules. But soon, in 1846, the familiar 2-section capsule would come out. Allicin has a wide range of effects and has few adverse reactions like penicillin. In this era of lack of medical means, it can definitely be regarded as a miracle drug. But Franz didn't mass produce it. He didn't apply for a patent, and no one except a few people even knew what it was, because the biggest gains from promoting this kind of thing at this time are Britain, France, and the United States. If Franz really promotes this kind of thing, he doesn't know how much patent fees he can recover, but the world will be divided up in less than 20 years. Done. There is no need to wait until the end of the 19th century. At that time, Austria can only drool over the meat in other people's bowls, or forcefully establish colonies in the Balkans, and finally disappear in the fireworks of civil war. Now that most of Chandler's territory has fallen into the hands of the Austrian church, Chandler's economic situation has improved a lot since retaking the northern silver mines occupied by the Siamese. Although gems and copper are valuable, they are commodities after all, and they only have value if they are sold. After the silver is brought back to Austria, it can be directly minted into currency. In fact, there are gold mines in the northern area of Chandler, but they have not been discovered yet. Franz has hired a group of geologists to search for gold mines. Of course, let the geologists go, and the more important thing is to carefully explore the resources. After all, the technology in the Chandler area is very primitive, and their understanding of resources is very backward. In addition, copper was indeed very valuable in Europe at that time, because Europe was the region with the most scarce copper resources except Antarctica. In the future, the role of copper would be huge, and the consumption would be astronomical. In Chandler, people mainly used wooden and stone tools. Their copper smelting technology was very poor, and they were very short of iron resources. Therefore, there has never been a truly powerful country in this area. What Archbishop Roche feared did not happen. The King of Siam did not become angry because the silver mines were robbed, raise an army to invade, or join forces with the Vietnamese to attack the Scutari. Instead, he wrote a letter to the church admitting his mistake, and at the same time, sent a large amount of treasures and slaves. He also expressed his willingness to carry out trade exchanges with the Austrian Empire and was willing to sign treaties to establish long-term political and economic relations. When Franz saw all this, he couldn't help but sigh. Rama III is really Thailand's only emperor through the ages. As the saying goes, if you don't hit someone with a smiling face, they will hand you unequal treaties. What reason is there to continue beating people up? Historically, Rama III relied on this almost shameless traitorous behavior to maintain Thailand's independent status, and later even became the only country in Southeast Asia that had not been colonized. Britain, France, the United States, the Netherlands, and Portugal have all considered Thailand, but whenever a country intends to dominate it, a group of powers will always come out to oppose it. And in the end they have to leave the matter alone. Siam's geographical location is very important and its resources are rich, but it is too far for the Austrian Empire. Instead, it can use its rich coal and iron resources to develop primary industry in Chenla. Chapter 178 The Burning Sea. Ottoman Empire, Istanbul. Majid pushed the waiter away and ran to the window in great joy. However, the scene inside the Golden Horn shocked him. A lone British warship sailed into the Golden Horn. The sails were full of holes, and the hull also had many exaggerated damages. Even the bow deck collapsed, and there were scorch marks everywhere. The glass on the poop was almost everything was shattered. Wounded people and corpses were constantly being carried out of the ship. A man who looked like a general was sitting on a box, his head resting weakly on a large wooden barrel beside him, breathing hard. Helmet still underestimated the size of the Egyptian navy. The opponent's number of capital ships was 7 times that of the British army, and there were countless small ships. The Egyptians rushed towards the British warship desperately. Helmet thought they wanted to get close to the British warship, but who knew that the other side actually used fire attack tactics, pouring kerosene, which is refined from petroleum, onto the outer shell of the ship. Combustible materials are difficult to extinguish once they catch fire. The traditional method of extinguishing fires with water has little effect on kerosene, and the fire will become more intense as the water is poured on it, and the fire will even spread more and more as the water flows. The Egyptian light gunboats only had 6-pound guns, but instead of shooting at the hull, they chose to get close to the gun ports. This almost suicidal attack method caused heavy losses to the British fleet. 2 third-level battleships were destroyed in this way. They killed it. It is already a miracle that the Birmingham escaped. Of course, if Helmet had chosen to escape as soon as he found out that he was ambushed, the result might have been much better. But without if, Helmet created Britain's most disastrous defeat since the Napoleonic Wars. Viscount Stratford immediately found Helmet. "Where is your fleet, General?" "That's all," Helmet said, pointing to the dilapidated, but still unwilling Birmingham. Majid returned to his seat in despair, his eyes seeming to have lost focus. Metternich looked very calm. Of course he knew what happened, because it was he who sent the British intelligence to Egypt. "Dear Sultan, if you are in need, we can support you and help you solve your troubles," Metternich said. "Okay, I agree to all the conditions you just mentioned. As long as Austria can make Muhammad Ali withdraw, I can give up on Bosnia and Serbia." Looking at Majid, who had lost his mind, Metternich showed a very amiable smile, but in his heart he had already laughed at this so-called smart man. "Just now, regarding the matter in Bosnia, we will help you solve the problem in Serbia in return. As for our support for you," Majid felt very frustrated. He did not expect that the British would lose so miserably, nor did he expect that the Ottoman Empire would turn to Austria, a feuding country, for support. He thought again that he had tried to humiliate Metternich before, and now the other party would definitely make things difficult or humiliate him. But for the sake of the Ottoman Empire and his rule, Majid had no choice but to swallow his anger. But who knew that the second half of Metternich's sentence was actually, "We allies? We should support each other more." After hearing this, Majid had mixed feelings in his heart. He was still inexperienced and could not understand the meaning. Although Metternich's words were high-sounding, he was just selling the other person's favor. After having achieved his goal, he also used the other person's little thoughts to humiliate the other person. To be honest, if it was him in the past, he would never have the intention of humiliating the other party. Instead, He will comfort him with kind words, let the other party feel his sincerity, and prepare for future negotiations. But in Metternich's heart, Austria and the Ottomans were sworn enemies. After the empire integrated Italy and Germany, sooner or later it would launch an attack on the hegemony of the Near East. Prime Minister Metternich, please send troops as soon as possible. Majid's attitude was very low this time. Please. Rest assured Sudan, we in Austria will keep our promises, but we also ask Sudan to sign the treaty and hand over Bosnia to our country. Metternich said. Majid signed the agreement in a daze, and Metternich was now most worried about the Austrian navy. It would be best if Archduke Friedrich could become famous in one battle, but if he lost like the British, wouldn't it mean that his achievements would be in vain? It is better to give up when things are good. Anyway, the goal of capturing Belgrade and Bosnia has been achieved. It was difficult for a politician like Metternich to understand the true meaning of promoting peace. They always feel that the agreement means everything, and that the fait accompli can drive away all prying beasts. But a country without swords is a different concept from having a sword, but not using it. For a country without a sword, the agreement signed is just a piece of waste paper. What was taken away, let you return. What you eat can also make you vomit it out. In order to live in better peace with other countries, and to drive away those tigers and wolves that peek at the food on your plate, it is also important to prove that you have a sword. Franz hoped that the Egyptian navy could end Britain's maritime hegemony, but that was impossible. Even if the French navy and the Austrian navy were added, the result would be the same. As for why they showed their swords to the Egyptians, of course they violated the rules of the game and attacked the British fleet, which was tantamount to declaring war on the great powers. Even if the British bombarded Beirut first, the Western countries were still united. This is of course impossible. There is only one reason: profit. The rise of Egypt is not in Austria's interests, and may even involve Austria in unnecessary wars for hegemony. In advance. In order to continue to maintain its status and influence in the subsequent five-nation conference, Austria needs a hearty victory to preserve the fruits of its victory and continue to enjoy peace. Muhammad Ali's ambitions were too great, and his strength was not enough to support his ambitions. Even if Austria did not take action, Russia would sooner or later. The so-called agreement could not tie Russia's hands. It is almost impossible to defeat Britain on the sea and Russia on land. If the Egyptians really did it, then Austria should destroy it now. Battle of Beirut. The British Navy lost 7 warships, 6 of which were sunk and 1 captured. In terms of personnel, about 1,500 people were buried in the sea, and more than 1,000 people were missing. The Egyptian navy killed all the British prisoners in order to vent their anger in the city of Beirut. All 5 forts were destroyed, and 35 cannons were lost. 2/3 of Beirut port was engulfed by fire, and more than 1,000 ships were lost, including fishing boats, civilian ships, merchant ships, warships, etc. The loss of life exceeded 3,000 people. The main fleet of the Egyptian navy lost 2 third-class battleships, 35 large and small ships, mainly light gunboats and sampans, and suffered more than 1,000 casualties. However, the battle report that Muhammad Ali saw only stated that the Egyptian navy had won a great victory. This result made him very satisfied. He felt that, as long as the French cooperated with him to annihilate another British fleet, the Egyptian navy would be able to defeat another British fleet, can dominate the Mediterranean. Even if the British main fleet arrives later, he will still have a secret fleet as a trump card. At that time, Egypt's maritime supremacy will be just around the corner. Chapter 179. The plan remains unchanged. Led by the first-class battleship King, a huge fleet with 11 third-class battleships, 6 cruisers, 4 frigates, and 3 troop carriers is slowly sailing into the Mediterranean Sea. Lieutenant General William Simmons is enjoying Hayden's work. Nelson's Mass, also known as the Emperor's Mass of the Sea. William Simmons participated in the Battle of Trafalgar, where he was aboard HMS Victory as the starboard gunner. When he heard that Lieutenant General Nelson had been shot, the battle was over. They had won, but they had lost that great captain forever. William Simmons always blamed himself for not being able to die in battle. After that, he kept fighting, looking for his own salvation. However, until Simmons became a fleet commander, he still did not die in battle with honor. He envied Helmut for being the first to leave for Beirut. It would be great if the Egyptian and Ottoman fleets were as strong as they boast. William Simmons said, 28. Battleships? It's indeed scary, but Captain, you are not planning to return, are you, Vice Captain? Rear Admiral Peel smiled and said that he did not take the Egyptian Navy and the Ottoman Navy seriously at all. If it were 28 French warships, he might persuade the reckless captain to turn around and return. The Egyptian battleships are too weak in terms of protection and firepower. Those fragile guys may not be able to survive our round of bombardment. William Simmons said with some worry. If someone else, or another captain, had said this, Major General Peel would have felt that the other party had drunk too much. But William Simmons' Monarch definitely has this qualification. The King was built after the victory with a displacement of 3,600 tons. It was equipped with 40 64-pound cannons on the bottom floor and 30 32-pound cannons. The upper gun deck was equipped with 20 24-pound long-barreled cannons and the top gun deck was equipped with 20 guns, an 18-pound long-barreled gun, and 5 64-pound short-barreled carronade guns at the bow and stern point. Its firepower is almost twice that of the common 74th ship, third-level battleship, and Captain William Simmons likes to fight the enemy within 300 meters. Who knows? Maybe if the battle ends soon, we can go ashore to find women. It is said that their women like to wear headscarves, and those women don't even know what they look like. It's so exciting to think about it. Major General Peel said optimistically. You guy? William Simmons was a little speechless, and then asked seriously, are the explosive bombs ready? Don't worry, I have already prepared according to your arrangements. Aren't you afraid that the enemy will not be able to fight? You are using such a foul weapon. Major General Peel joked, I will not make fun of the lives of my soldiers. Aren't you following me, because I'm victorious in every battle? Are you coming with me to seek death? Simmons asked rhetorically, Mr. Captain, didn't you add water to your today? Why are you talking nonsense? Of course we are following you to make a fortune. I heard that Beirut is a wealthy city. Maybe after this battle, we can save enough money to go home, marry a wife, and build a factory. On the other hand, the Egyptian Navy, under the instructions of Muhammad Ali, stayed in Beirut, waiting for the arrival of the British fleet. Ali received a pigeon message from the French saying that the French fleet was already on its way to Beirut, and was expected to arrive in 2 days. According to Ali's estimation, the French fleet will arrive in Beirut before the British. By then, the combined French and Egyptian fleets will be unprecedentedly large, and they can definitely easily eat up the British fleet. Then there will be a decisive battle with the British North Sea Fleet. Although the North Sea Fleet is very powerful, it still has a trump card, and by then it may be possible to recruit the Russians into its ranks. As long as the British North Sea Fleet is eliminated, British maritime hegemony will end. After all, they still have so many colonies to maintain, and it is impossible to send all the fleets to the Mediterranean. The day when Egypt will dominate Eurasia is coming, Muhammad Ali thought. Friedrich also received information from the Egyptian Navy, and also confirmed the intelligence that the French Navy had not taken any action. In fact, Thiers had already lost power at this time. King Louis Philippe stood up against his adventurous policies. Together with Guizot, the power of the Prime Minister fell into the hands of Marshal Soult. The old Marshal just wanted to retire peacefully. He was firmly opposed to going to war with Britain, and it was impossible to send the navy to support the Egyptians. This was supported by Guizot, and Guizot even gave this information to the British. Palmerston's London conference became his one-man show, a one-man show in the true sense. Only Britain participated. France was not invited, and Russia and Austria refused to participate out of their own interests. The Prussian ambassador was bribed by the French, and suggested to the Prussian king to give up attending the London conference on the grounds that discussing the Near East issue was of no value to Prussia. William IV felt that Sewell, Prussian foreign minister, was right and agreed with him. At this point, Palmerston was disgraced. To make matters worse, the British Navy's advance team was defeated by the Egyptians, creating the 19th century, the largest maritime tragedy in history. Some members of Congress have begun to impeach Palmerston. After all, he has brought double losses to Britain's reputation and military point. What's even more terrible is that there is a British squadron heading towards Beirut in accordance with previous orders. If another British fleet is destroyed, Britain will have no choice but to send out the North Sea Fleet. The expedition of the North Sea Fleet means a huge attrition, and it also means the bankruptcy of Britain's Near East plan, because the mission of the North Sea Fleet is to defend the British mainland, not to fight externally. This time, Palmerston did not have the history of changing clouds and rain. Russia still occupied the Black Sea, and the Straits Convention only existed in his mind. The French are eyeing Britain's status, and may become the third competitor, referring to world hegemony, at any time. Austria's influence has not been weakened, and it is fighting for its own interests in its own way. The Ottomans' confidence in Britain was shaken, and they began to seek help from other powers. The Egyptians listed Britain as their #1 enemy and almost wiped out a British squadron. The losses were so heavy that even the Queen and Prince Albert were shocked. Under great pressure, Palmerston did another stupid thing. He broke the virginity of one of the Queen's maids in Windsor Castle where the Queen lived. Although the news was temporarily suppressed, it would reach the Queen's ears sooner or later. In order to escape the blame, he thought of his old friend Sassoon. Maybe India is a good place. When Palmerston applied to go to India, he did not arouse anyone's suspicion. After all, his series of mistakes caused Britain to suffer huge losses, so applying for overseas release was regarded as atonement. At the same time, Lieutenant General Simmons also received intelligence from the French, telling him that the entire main force of the Egyptian Navy was in Beirut, where there was a death trap specially designed for him, and advised him to wait for reinforcement. What do you think, Mr. Peel? Simmons handed the letter to the other party. Listen to your captain. I obey the order. Major General Peel did not read the letter, but saluted with a military salute. The plan remains unchanged, and we move forward at full speed. Chapter 180. Thalia, who is not doing her job properly. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Thalia, why are you not doing your job all day long? Franz looked at her helplessly. Thalia was appointed by Franz as the principal of the Royal Academy for Women in Vienna. This position was not low, and it was considered a very important part of Franz's plan. However, Thalia would rather come back and stand in the corner doing push-ups than go back. This made Franz a little confused about the brain circuit of this official fan. What do you mean by not doing your job properly? Thalia asked confidently. As the principal of the Royal Academy for Women in Vienna, why don't you stay at school and run back all the time? How dare you say that? That's not a school, it's just a harem you prepared for yourself. They are all children, chattering all day long, and they annoy me to death. Thalia said angrily. Isn't there a junior high school? Franz asked. Junior high school? A group of resentful women who lack love. They hold tea parties in the school all day long, just like attending a salon. Apart from drinking tea and walking the dog, they just talk about their parents' affairs and ask some weird questions. What problem? Is there any problem that our clever Thalia can't solve? Franz joked. They ask how old you are. What do I say? Thalia said. Franz, anyway, you can take care of your harem yourself. I won't leave here. What can you do? Maybe it was because she had exhausted her energy by doing push-ups, or maybe she had talked too much, so Thalia sat directly at the coffee table and started eating. In fact, Thalia was right when she said that this school is a harem. She is indeed the person who has been with Franz for the longest time, and she does understand him very well. But it is not accurate to say that it is Franz's harem. This should be regarded as the harem of the Austrian Empire. Most of those noble women will marry nobles or so-called successful people in Austria. After all, in any era, it is important to be well matched. There may be stories about noble ladies falling in love with poor boys, but those poor boys generally have extraordinary qualities. They are either brave, smart, strong, confident, and optimistic, or have extraordinary looks. Let me mention that you can really make a living by relying on your face. Beauty is definitely a scarce resource. And if the other half of the so-called successful people and nobles is a fool, their offspring will most likely inherit this. After all, the child's genes come from both parents at the same time. The most important thing is to prevent some scientific geniuses from devoting themselves to research and forgetting their lifelong events, or directly marrying close relatives to save trouble. Therefore, this plan actually gives those who can make outstanding contributions to mankind the first opportunity to choose a mate. Compared to the so-called inheritance of noble blood, Franz felt that scientific blood was more valuable. Since ancient times, women have chased men across a veil, and men have chased women across a mountain. No matter how crazy Frankenstein is, as long as he has enough exposure, he is not afraid that he will not find what he likes. And from the perspective of human resources, female resources in this era have not been fully developed. Simple heavy physical labor cannot represent everything. With the development of science and technology, the difference in workability between men and women will become smaller and smaller, especially in fields such as science and technology and administrative management. Historically, it was not until World War II that female human resources were liberated. The reason is simple, that is, men are on the battlefield. Sometimes, in order to retain talents, Franz would send spies to sneak into the school. Of course, if the other party can really do it, beauty cannot sway his heart, honor and wealth cannot change his ambition, and life and death cannot stop him. Then Franz will put away his sugar-coated attacks and pay tribute to the true patriots. Franz would not do anything to Thalia. After all, she was the first friend he made in this world and had done a lot of things for him. Without her, Franz's layout would have been very difficult. But Franz no longer has her place here, and Jenny has taken over all the work that Thalia was previously responsible for. In contrast, Jenny is more capable and more willing to accept these tasks. Thalia can do the same thing with lots of loopholes, but Jenny can do it without leaks. This is the difference between people. Thalia was unemployed even as an e-pillow, and Jenny's figure had an advantage over her. Jenny has music skills and has been a singer. Even reading newspapers has more charm and a better voice. There is a gap between the two in all aspects of ability, including appearance and emotional intelligence. If Franz traveled through ancient China, he might have taken Jenny away long ago. Neither Franz nor Thalia is good at managing human resources. Even though they are 2 generations apart, Franz still lacks true leadership qualities. Knowledge, he had absolutely no confidence in convincing those politicians and scientists, and Jenny just has this kind of temperament. She can easily persuade the other party to do something that is impossible, or that the other party thinks is impossible. As for the position of principal, Thalia only needs to implement Franz's ideas, and other tasks can be left to others. Only Thalia can do this, because she is the person who knows Franz best. Moreover, the position of president of the Royal Academy for Women in Vienna is both sensitive and embarrassing. There are many experts in various fields in the college, and most of the students are from noble families. It is not easy to convince everyone. But it is not that there are no candidates, and the embarrassing thing is that a man may not be suitable as the dean of a women's college. So Thalia, who is a royal tutor, became the best candidate. This identity can completely silence the professors and students, and she can also implement Franz's ideas. You must know that universities are the breeding ground for the birth of all kinds of ideas, some of which are radical, some conservative, and some crazy. Franz didn't want to spend money to train a group of mourners of his own. Of course, Franz can also be the principal himself, but he cannot spend all his time on the college. The entire empire, and even the entire Europe, are waiting for him to plan. Therefore, Franz can only let the person he is most at ease with do it. Franz walked to the coffee table, patted Thalia on the shoulder meaningfully, and shook his head. Now that she is staying here, in addition to interfering with Ajana's work, she will also drag him along to eat sweets. Franz can only say, "Let me ask you, what have you done in Schönbrunn Palace all these years?" Thalia thought about it seriously and said, "Taking care of children, studying, that's right, the college does this too. It's the professional counterpart, and you see how majestic those professors are. One person can take care of so many students, and after you become the principal, you can take care of those professors. Then the most you are the one who is majestic." Thalia thought for a while. It seemed reasonable, but something was wrong. Franz finally fooled Thalia away, and Jenny couldn't help laughing. Chapter 181 Scientists. The coast is very quiet, and the dark water laps hard against the rocks. The soldiers of the Austrian Marine Corps hid the boat behind the rocks that were difficult to detect. 10 attack groups, a total of 50 Marines, were stepping on the rocks and slowly moving towards the location where the 3-point fire was lit. In order to reduce the noise as much as possible, their shoes are specially made by Franz's arsenal. They are rubber non-slip shoes. The patterns on them can greatly increase the friction, while not being too heavy and making unnecessary noise. The exterior adopts suede waterproof technology, and an aluminum alloy plate is installed on the interior, which is also puncture resistant. Their military boots should be the best in this era. The technology of aluminum alloy is not difficult. Just adding some copper and magnesium can greatly strengthen the strength of the aluminum, and at the same time it is very light. However, it was not easy to explain this principle to the craftsman, so Franz simply classified it as alchemy. Vulcanized rubber technology was originally invented by Americans, but Franz did not intend to pay patent fees to the Americans, so he made this technology available in advance. It is similar to aluminum alloy technology and does not have a high threshold point, and under Franz's operation, the chemical community in Vienna can be said to be a star-studded one. Avogadro, another unlucky guy in the history of science, also lived in Austria. He was a genius chemist who was unknown during his lifetime. 50 years after his article was published, someone finally understood it and regarded him as a god, and named the law he discovered Avogadro's law. Avogadro, who received a salary of 500 florins at the University of Turin and worked as a scribe at night, heard that there was a job with an annual salary of 2,000 florins, and immediately went to Vienna with his family. Friedrich Weller, 36 years old at this time, was the director of the Department of Chemistry at the University of Göttingen. He was at the peak of his life. Franz had rejected several invitations, and the University of Göttingen also attached great importance to him. Try your best to stay. In the end, Jenny asked one of her subordinates to get through Weller's line by getting close to Weller's teacher Leopold Melin. Weller respected his teacher Gemelin very much, so naturally he could not refuse the teacher's invitation. So the master and apprentice packed up and came to Vienna. Leopold Gommeling was also a great chemist, but his personal ethics were not very good, and he was easily controlled by Jenny's subordinates. The Violet Knights have no effect at all in the hands of Madame Sophie. After being handed over to Jenny, some troublesome things can be solved at a very small cost. Of course, Madame Sophie didn't do nothing. She stuffed those orphans and misguided women into the Violet Knights. The team that originally had only a dozen people has now grown to nearly 300 people, but the level is just low. It's hard to say enough. Jenny's former deputy, Caroline, has a less obvious scar on her face. Robert William Bunsen and Kirchhoff came to Vienna while wandering around. Franz did not know these two people, so naturally he would not invite them. The two hot-blooded people were not very famous. They had a great time in Vienna and had a lot of fun. When they woke up the next day, they saw carriages carrying gorgeous aristocratic ladies heading north of the city. The two followed him all the way and entered the Royal Academy for Women in Vienna in a daze. It happened that the school did not have enough teachers. The person in charge of admissions happened to be Professor Liebig. He was originally very disgusted with the two drunkards, and when he heard that they were majoring in chemistry, Professor Liebig became even more furious. However, after some testing, the two of them turned out to be quite insightful, and Liebig was impressed by their talents and extended his hand. Gentlemen, congratulations on successfully passing the examination. Introduce yourself, Eustace von Liebig. It is a pleasure to work with you. Robert, William Bunsen and Kirchhoff were stunned at first, and then shook their heads. Impossible. You must be dreaming. If you were Liebig, I would be Plato. Bunsen said. Then, I'm Socrates. Kirchhoff continued. Why? Are you Socrates? I'm older than you. Bunsen said. It's amazing how old you are, and I drink more than you. Kirchhoff retorted. I see that you are not sober. Let me help you sober up. Bunsen slapped Kirchhoff in the face. Hey, it hurts so much. Why does it still hurt so much in my dream? Wake up too. Kirchhoff also slapped him in the face. Kirchhoff and Bunsen slapped each other in the face, and Liebig finally couldn't bear it anymore and walked away, leaving only one sentence: to lunatics. After a while, Kirchhoff and Bunsen each covered their red and swollen cheeks and said, "It doesn't seem like a dream." Then it was really Liebig himself. Wow. The two hugged each other and started crying again, not sure whether it was excitement or shame. Charles Babbage, a genius inventor, invented the principle of the analytical engine, the predecessor of the modern electronic computer, in 1834. In this design, he imagined that any computer could be run based on instructions on punched cards that stored data, the possibility of mathematical operations, and envisaged most of the other features of modern computers. However, the British government refused to support his work on the grounds that his ideas were too advanced and his designs were difficult to realize. Just when the genius was looking for a job, Vienna responded to him. Charles Babbage only wanted to complete his research, so he immediately accepted Franz's invitation. No one in this era knew better than Franz how important computers were, and the funding Babbage requested was not very high, £1,500 per year. Babbage was accompanied by his assistant, Ada Lovelace, the only legitimate heir to Lord Byron and the first programmer in history. They were British, and the subject they studied required a lot of mathematical calculations, so Franz arranged for some mathematicians to be their assistants. Franz knew that Babbage's dream would not succeed. However, 100 years later, people developed a real computer based on his research, which is what we later know as a computer. Historically, Babbage did not receive any funding, but in order to turn the drawings of the analytical engine into reality, he spent all his property and became impoverished. He had no choice but to put down the work at hand temporarily and discuss with Ada how to make some money, such as making some chess toys, some horse racing game consoles, etc. In order to raise scientific research funds, they have to go to sea to generate income. In the end, the two fell into a predicament of constant panic. Ada reluctantly sent her husband's ancestral treasures to a pawn shop twice to maintain daily expenses, and these treasures were redeemed twice by her mother. Poverty combined with endless mental work caused Ada's health to deteriorate rapidly. In 1852, with a beautiful dream for the success of the analytical engine and a silent sadness, the heroin software wizard died at the age of 36. After that, Babbage persisted for another 20 years in poverty, and finally passed away unwillingly. In order to live and research, Babbage even worked as a tutor and maid to compete for food, which was the most despised by scholars of this era. So after Babbage and Ada arrived in Vienna, the first thing they did was eat hazelnuts. The chefs in the dining room had never seen such a miserable looking professor. Fortunately, the women's college had a handicraft class, and a group of little Lalita lined up to feed the two hungry professors with their own experimental products. Chapter 182: Stealing a Home. The reef has been submerged in seawater for a long time and is very slippery. Fortunately, the new military boots of the Marine Corps soldiers have anti-skid function, so no one slipped. On the contrary, the anti-skid texture on the shoes allows the soldiers to better leverage their strength and travel on the rocks at extremely fast speeds. In fact, Friedrich originally planned to let the soldiers carry out this battle barefoot, because most of the selected soldiers came from Venice and Tyrol, and most of them were used to going into battle barefoot. But Franz felt that the terrain was too complex. After nearly a year of research, the terrain of the combat area had been carefully explored, including reefs, beaches, mountains, jungles, and even ports and indoors, plus the seaside. There are many mosquitoes, birds and animals, so not wearing shoes will greatly increase the chance of accidents. After receiving the military shoes, the soldiers were full of praise for the military boots after several months of training. Friedrich also got a pair to wear, but they felt hard and heavy, but they were good for cracking nuts. What the soldiers didn't know was that the cost of their military boots was almost as much as their annual income. At this time, aluminum alloy plates and vulcanized rubber were new technologies, and the output was not high. The ultra-thin aluminum alloy and specially treated hard rubber used in their military boots were specially made by experts. Soon after solving a group of sentries, the Marines arrived at a secluded harbor. Captain Hans used his telescope to confirm the number of forts again, and was elbowed twice by a soldier. Captain Hans followed the direction pointed by the team members and saw several small dark red dots in the woods below the cliff point. This was undoubtedly a secret whistle from the Egyptians. If it were not discovered in time, this operation would probably end in failure. The secret whistle is an absolute secret of the Egyptians, and the Karamanli family has tried every means to figure out its rules at this time. Franz thought of a good idea. These secret sentries must be very hard and lonely. Why not give them some cigarettes to relieve their boredom? No matter how well they hide, the firelight, smoke rings, and smell will always show their flaws. This trick really worked, and every secret sentry accepted the spy's tribute. There was a sound of a dagger across the neck, followed by a rustling sound. After half an hour of clearing out, the Marines eliminated a total of 9 batches of hidden sentries. It seems that the Egyptians have really spent a lot of money on this base. After solving the peripheral defenses, the Marines finally arrived at this inconspicuous harbor in the huge natural cave. There stands a huge shipyard. After decades of excavation, the internal scale has exceeded ordinary people's imagination. Muhammad Ali regarded it as a cave for hiding soldiers given to Egypt by God, and named it Chyansi Bay. It was also proof that he would eventually rule the world. There are a total of 8 forts in the entire bay. Each of the 8 attack groups is responsible for one, and the remaining 2 groups serve as support. At this time, they have changed into the uniforms of the Egyptian Navy. When the fort is captured, lenses will be used to reflect the fire, and then Captain Hans will fire a signal flare, while the Marines will detonate various forts and arsenals. What Captain Hans didn't know was that in addition to their Dragon Special Forces team, there were 2 full-scale Special Forces teams joining the operation. Their code names were SEALs and Falcons. The SEALs targeted the Egyptian Navy's arsenal, while the Falcons targeted the labor camps. The SEAL team members are all made up of Venetians, most of whom do not speak German, and are also more proficient in water skills. They will dive directly into the arsenal outside the dock, where they will be met by members of the Karamanli family. The Falcon commandos were lurking in the mountains early in the morning, waiting for opportunities to take advantage of the chaos and release the workers. To create greater chaos, the labor camp is the weakest defense point in the entire harbor, but it is almost impossible to attack the dock from here, because the road leading to the dock is very narrow and has almost no cover. All it takes is a small army of soldiers and a few sandbags to seal off the road. On top of the fort, there were 2 Egyptian Navy sentries, dozing off holding their guns. The buzzing of flying insects and the crackling of torches could not disturb them. The 2 Marines covered the mouths of the 2 sentries from behind at the same time. As the dagger passed across their necks, red blood flowed out of their necks, and the struggle stopped briefly. After disposing of the sentry's body, he quietly connected the fuse to the gunpowder barrel of the fort. The barracks on the side were crowded with snoring Egyptian soldiers. They were temporarily transferred to strengthen defense. But the defense has not been strengthened, only the number of people has increased. Since it was still early for the changing of the guard, the Marines simply locked the door of the barracks from the outside, obtained gunpowder and connected it to the fuse, preparing for a double-shot cannon. Time passed by minute by second, and Captain Hans repeatedly stared at the pocket watch in his hand. 2/4 of an hour before the changing of the guard, the 8 forts finally flashed a strange light. As a red flare rose into the sky, the Marines scattered everywhere lit the fuse at the same time. On the sea, Friedrich's fleet had been waiting for a long time. This was his first battle, and Friedrich was as excited as a student taking the college entrance examination, and stayed up all night. As a whistle sounded, the propellers began to rotate in the water, and 15 steam gunboats escorted 3 large landing ships to the Egyptian secret harbor. Continuous explosions came from the fort, arsenal and labor camp respectively. The Egyptian defenders hurriedly dressed and prepared to leave the barracks and fight the invaders. However, many Egyptian defenders discovered that the barracks door was locked from the outside. Just as the Egyptians were trying to open the door, there was a loud bang. A gunpowder barrel containing hundreds of kilograms of gunpowder exploded at the door. The huge shock wave directly blew the door panel into pieces, and those fragments easily penetrated the bodies of the Egyptian soldiers. Suddenly, the barracks was a mess of blood and flesh. Inside the harbor, 3 large landing ships directly sent out nearly 1,000 soldiers, and even brought 1-pound guns to help, and quickly suppressed the remaining Egyptian soldiers inside. The Egyptian military camp outside was attacked intensively by Congreve rockets from the Austrian Navy 2000. Of the latest tale, Congreve rockets turned the Egyptian barracks into a sea of flames. The governor of Alexandria did not know the secret of the bay. Hearing the continuous explosions, he thought that the main force of the British army had landed, and ordered the troops to defend Alexandria and not step out of the port. Anyone who disobeys the order will be subject to military law. The unsupported dock defenders were obviously no match for the Austrian navy. When they actually entered the dock, the Marines were all shocked. There were actually 9 newly built quasi-first-class battleships. The level of craftsmanship was too low, and 10 quasi-third-tier battleship. This is an astonishing wealth. With this, the Austrian navy can compete with Russia and France in the Mediterranean. It's just that these big guys weighing thousands of tons cannot be taken away easily. Fortunately, Franz was prepared. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 183, Stealing a Home. In order to build battleships, Muhammad Ali built a labor camp on the hill behind the dock, which was filled with a large number of craftsmen who were coerced by the Egyptian government. They had long had enough of Allah's brutal rule, and members of the Karamanli family had secretly infiltrated the labor force and told those craftsmen that one day someone will come to save them. When the time comes, they will drive the battleship they built with their own hands and leave this hell. The treatment of craftsmen in Egypt was extremely low, especially the conscripted laborers. They were no different from slaves in Ali's eyes, and the Egyptian soldiers were naturally even less likely to treat them well. Everyone, including craftsmen, had no real wages, and whips and sticks were commonplace. Not only do they have to do high intensity labor every day, but they also have very little food. There are often dozens or hundreds of craftsmen crowded into one room. What was even worse was the coolies. They only had simple tents. In order to prevent them from escaping, many of them had their feet shackled. Every guard had the right to shoot and kill those who escaped. As for those who are sick and injured, there is only one principle, that is, if you do not support idle people, you will die. If you cannot work under this kind of treatment, no craftsman wants to fulfill Allah's dream. The so-called Great Arab Empire cannot move them. Just wanting to survive has become their only hope. As for the warships they build, the craftsmanship will naturally be greatly reduced. But these people gave the Austrian navy the possibility of a complete victory. As the Austrian navy's attack began, a large number of craftsmen rushed out of the labor camp that had been breached by the Marines. Thousands of craftsmen rushed to the dock to seize the ships. They used the simplest tools to eliminate the only garrison in the dock. Of course, there were also many craftsmen who were unwilling to leave this land. They rushed out of the dock and fled into the nearby mountains and forests. Originally, the Austrian navy could not take away these battleships, but with the help of thousands of Egyptian craftsmen, it was not impossible. The craftsmen raised the sails, and the brand new battleships sailed out of the port one after another, of course to ensure that they would act according to Franz's plan. 50 Marines were dispatched to each warship to ensure the smooth implementation of the plan. Seeing the battleship sailing out of the port, the last courage of the Egyptian defenders also disappeared, because they knew very well that losing the battleship would only lead to death. As a result, their morale collapsed completely, and they fled in all directions at night. As early as when the workers rushed out of the labor camp, there were many defenders rubbing oil at their feet, but this time no one wanted to stay and be buried with this shipyard. In fact, the Egyptian defenders did not understand until the end how those 4 to 5 meter high forts fell, and there were so many hidden sentries. Are they all blind? Why did they not sound the alarm when so many enemies sneaked in? Many of the Dragon special forces responsible for attacking the forts were selected from the mountain hunters of Tyrol. Those forts that were inaccessible to ordinary people were as easy as drinking water for them. And compared with the smugglers and bandits they usually deal with, these Egyptians appear to be less vigilant. The battle went smoothly beyond Friedrich's imagination. The brutal naval battle he had expected did not happen. On land, the elite Austrian troops also defeated the Egyptian defenders unilaterally. What made him even more delighted was that Muhammad Ali, who had spent many years building the country with all his efforts, fell into Austrian hands. No matter how shoddy the Egyptian warships were, the cost of each first-level ship would not be less than 1 million florins, and the price of a third-level battleship would not be less than 300,000 florins. With the first ray of sunlight rising on the sea, Friedrich could hardly believe his own eyes. Behind him were 19 huge sailing battleships, whose military power even exceeded the combined strength of the Austrian navy. No man can resist the temptation of cannons, giant ships and excavators. Friedrich touched his nose. 30 years to the east of the river, 30 years to the west of the river. Don't bully young people into poverty. In this battle, the Austrian navy's 15 steam gunboats and 3 steam landing ships were lost. They sank 2 Egyptian navy cruisers, 4 battleships under construction, captured 19 enemy battleships, and rescued 3,000 Egyptian shipbuilders. The Marine Corps suffered 39 casualties, wiped out nearly 2,000 Egyptian defenders, killed the Egyptian Navy Minister Ash Pasha, destroyed 8 forts, 2 arsenals, and 3 barracks. The governor of Alexander, Vishaxi Pasha, committed suicide. The casualties of the Marine Corps mainly occurred after the landing, indiscriminate shooting and trampling when the line of sight was insufficient, and accidental damage by Congreve rockets. 2 rockets even flew directly into the crowd. Along with the secret dockyard, not only their fleet was destroyed, but also the war potential of the Egyptian Navy. More than half of the craftsmen of the Egyptian Navy were abducted to Austria along with Friedrich's fleet. It was obvious that they could not return to their homeland of Egypt, so they simply stayed in Austria to work as craftsmen for the rest of their lives. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. It seems that our harem manager cannot do without you. Ajani smiled. She just doesn't quite understand her responsibilities yet, Franz said. Ajani stretched out her slender white fingers and lifted Franz's chin. What? A handsome little man. If you can fall in love with any girl, she must be lucky. The voice was pleasant and gentle. Miss Ajani, you made fun of me again, Franz said modestly. Some habits are difficult to break, such as this somewhat hypocritical self-effacement. No, Archduke Franz, I'm serious, Ajani said as she approached Franz, like a lion approaching step by step. Ajani's facial features are already extremely beautiful, but her eyes light up the entire facial features. Those were the most beautiful eyes Franz had ever seen. Even though he had seen them many times, he still didn't have the courage to look into them. Then Franz's eyes moved downward unconsciously, and then he saw an even more heart-stirring sight. As his heartbeat accelerated and blood surged, Franz simply closed his eyes. However, an alluring aroma still penetrated Franz's nostrils. Stop making trouble and tell me if you have anything to do. Otherwise, I will send you to my mother and let her play with you. Ajani put away her smile and asked, why? Do you have a soft spot for the Tyroleans? Oh, is it so? Tyrol is surrounded by mountains. It is easy to defend, but difficult to attack. I think you must know better than me. If one day there is a rebellion in this place, you will have to pay a huge price. Not only will your hard work be in vain, but also it would cost the lives of many Austrian soldiers. The peak creates false advocacy. The dusk witnesses the true believers, Franz said. Since ancient times, the light infantry from the Tyrol region has been Austria's signature force. During the 30 Years' War, Tyrol was the Habsburg family's strongest supporter until their defeat. During the Napoleonic Wars, the Austrian Empire abandoned Tyrol and ceded it to France and its allies afterwards. With no hope, the Tyroleans revolted again and again to drive away the Bavarian army, and even repelled the French attack many times. In the end, Napoleon had to mobilize a force several times the size of the rebel army to suppress it. Jenny could understand what Franz meant, but she still asked, who can guarantee that they will always be loyal? Franz just smiled and didn't answer. Chapter 184 Mass. Because Franz could not tell her that 100 years after the demise of the Austrian Empire, the Tyrolean guerrillas were still seeking opportunities for restoration on Italian soil, and they were not completely wiped out by the Italians until the 1990s. During World War II, the soldiers of the SS Totenkopf locked themselves in their positions and their madness left the Allies unbelievable. But decades Earlier Tyrol's border guards had done the same thing. They chained themselves to cliffs and stone walls until they died in battle point during World War I. When facing the 800,000 Italian army, they chose the same brutal fighting style as the Chiawen blockade point. Tyrolean soldiers, organized into companies and platoons, locked themselves in position and used the advantageous terrain to block Italy's elite mountain divisions until all of them were killed. As one position after another was captured, the number of Tyrol's border guards continued to decrease. There was only silence in the rear position, and the soldiers could only watch their companions die in battle point. And in the ensuing battle, he accepted his fate. As the battle progressed, the time left for the Italians became less and less. Finally, reinforcement from the Austro-Hungarian Empire arrived, but the number of Tyrolean border guards was less than a quarter of the original number. During the hell-like war of World War I, young people from the Tyrol region were sent to the battlefield one after another. Most of them could not come back alive, and in some towns all the young people died, so they could only send the old people to the battlefield. According to the laws of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time, the Tyroleans had the right to refuse to participate in the war, because the battlefields of the Austro-Hungarian Empire were not in Tyrol. They could use this to refuse imperial conscription, but in fact those people never exercised this right until the end of the First World War. The Tyrolean Defense Forces are responsible for guarding Tyrol, and belong to the local army, and in the coming year of the storm, there were only 2 regions in the entire Austrian Empire where no large-scale rebellions occurred. One of them is Tyrol and the other is Galicia. Jenny is a Polish patriot. Although she is now working for Franz, she will still favor her nation. Just when Jenny learned that Austria planned to build a railway to Krakow, she knew that the last bit of dignity of the Poles was about to be wiped away. Jenny cannot stop the tide of time, but she can make her compatriots a little better off. So it is natural to hope that Franz can favor Galicia. However, the important reason why Franz was unable to lean toward Galicia was because of Jan's Polish compatriots. The land in this area was controlled by Polish nobles, and they were the source of Galicia's unrest and the root of its backwardness. These nobles thought about restoring the country all day long, violated Austrian laws, and refused agricultural reforms. As a result, the land of Galicia was not only not fully developed, but was regressing year by year. The reason turned out to be ridiculous. Slaves do not deserve the same food as their masters. Galicia's agriculture was developed, and after the Austrians annexed the area, they gave it considerable preferential treatment, one of which was free mills. This was actually a means by the Austrian government to weaken the strength of the Polish nobility. After all, at that time, serfs could only send grain to the landlord's mills, and the landlords could harvest the serfs' property twice. According to the situation that year, these free mills only served a small number of serfs, but they still dealt a heavy blow to the interests of the Polish nobility, and allowed the serfs to often eat the same food as the landlords. This group of Polish nobles not only did not regard the local Jews and Ukrainians as human beings, they even did not regard the Polish civilians as human beings. To the extent that the most supportive people in Galicia were the Polish civilians who supported Austrian rule. According to a certain philosopher, the nobles have everything, while the common people have nothing. But what is worse than nothing is the life of a serf. The serfs also supported Austria, but they did not have enough power, and the civilians could provide the large number of serfs with weapons, intelligence, and legal support to severely attack the Polish noble resistance. Galicia was one of the few oil-producing areas in the Austrian Empire. However, the industrial application of oil at this time was still very limited. As for agriculture, as mentioned above, most of the land was in the hands of Polish nobles, many of whom were not very friendly to the Austrian Empire and even rejected agricultural reforms. The Habsburg family, which is known for its kindness, certainly cannot take strong measures directly. Franz was still looking for opportunities. Building a railway to Krakow was indeed an opportunity, but it was not the best time yet. Franz also tried the strategy of peaceful evolution, but the Polish nation was unexpectedly united, and would rather not make money than follow the rhythm of Austria. It was surprisingly difficult to tame. Franz didn't want to leave corpses everywhere, at least he didn't want to do it himself. Outside the port of Beirut, on the sea. With the waves, broken shipboards and borders continued to wash up on the beach. The smell of blood attracted countless fish to participate in this gluttonous feast. On the king, the musicians were still playing Nelson's Mass. William Simmons impatiently walked back and forth on the deck of the warship, urging the soldiers, "Hurry up, guys. My grandpa can shoot more accurately than you, and the girls in Barrett are waiting for you. I want to eat those grilled meatballs skewered with olive branches tonight, so don't waste my time." At this time, the first-class battleship King was at the center of the Egyptian fleet. However, just like its name, the 6 surrounding Egyptian warships slowly lowered their heads like paying homage to the emperor. Looking at the burning and sinking Egyptian warships, the sailors on the King did not show any expressions of joy, but just went about their work. The sovereign charged into the center of the Egyptian fleet. But any Egyptian ship that tried to get close to it was blown to pieces. However, those Egyptian warships that were far away from the King did not dare to shoot at it for fear of accidentally injuring friendly forces. A 2-masted gunboat crossed in front of the sovereign, trying to prevent it from continuing its rampage. However, Simmons did not order an emergency evasion, but ran headlong into the brig in front. The 300-ton ketch was cut like butter in front of the King and instantly shattered into 2 pieces. As for the small gunboats and sampans, they were bombed into pieces before they even got close to the King. Just as Simmons's flagship was killing all the Egyptian navy, the remaining British warships formed a formation. However, the commander-in-chief of the Egyptian navy, Eperich Pasha, was surprised to find through the telescope that the British did not intend to support their flagship, but planned to surround it with less than half the strength of the Egyptian navy and annihilate it. Eperich Pasha threw the telescope to the ground and smashed it to pieces. He vowed to teach the British a lesson they would never forget. However, the reality is that those British people do have the qualifications to be proud of. The British warships are much stronger than the Egyptian navy in terms of fire rate and protection, and the quality of their personnel is even different. Many of the sailors of the Egyptian navy were farmers or soldiers 6 months ago. There is only one reason why they became sailors, and that is that they do not get seasick. The sailors of this British fleet are a group of out-and-out veterans. Many of them have been on the ship as apprentices since they were 12 or 13 years old and have been sailors all their lives. Even when they are drunk, they can ride on the bumpy road. The deck was flat. The most terrifying thing is the technological gap between the 2 sides. The British Army has used the latest high-explosive artillery shells, which are also called ship killers by later generations. It can even be said that the emergence of this kind of artillery shells ended the era of wooden sails. However, the Egyptian navy was always waiting for reinforcement, but the French navy did not arrive as promised. The battle ended in the Emperor's Mass at sea. The British Navy won a complete victory, with 127 killed and 503 wounded. Of the 25 Egyptian capital ships, 15 were sunk, 10 were captured, and 4,700 people were killed. Chapter 185 Poison Candy. News of the Egyptian naval defeat reached Cairo in the Mania Palace. Muhammad Ali felt dizzy, and a maid tried to step forward to help him. However, in an instant, the maid fell into a pool of blood. Muhammad Ali held the scimitar still dripping blood in his hand and laughed. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. You must all be lying to me. The number of battleships of Eperich Pasha is twice that of the British. Even if they cannot be defeated, they will not be completely wiped out. Thiers promised me. France will definitely send troops. In fact, Thiers really wanted to have a big fight with the British. However, at this time, the French King Louis Philippe was an Anglophobe, and verbal threats to go to war with the British were the limit of what he could tolerate. The current situation is good enough for France. There is no need to go to war with the British over Egypt. And as far as Louis Philippe himself was concerned, he felt that Britain was invincible. After all, as powerful as Napoleon, he couldn't break the English Channel. Rather than creating any great achievements, he would rather be a peaceful monarch and continue his family's rule. Soult has long since lost his ambitions, and now he just wants to retire. Guizot, who actually held power, was a complete pro-British faction. In the end, the French Navy did not take action. After all, most Europeans felt that the British Navy could not defeat it at this time. Even during the Crimean War, the Russians would rather sink the ship than have a head-on conflict with the British Navy. No one of the surrounding court officials dared to step forward to dissuade him. They could only cower and pray that Ali Pasha would not call his name. At this time, a clever courtier remembered the opium wine and hurriedly opened the wine cabinet. The moment the cork was removed, Ali seemed to wake up. After taking a big gulp, he slammed the bottle to the ground. He didn't expect that his allies would be so short-sighted. It seemed that he could only use his trump card to let those short-sighted guys know his true strength. Pass. My order to ask Aspasha to immediately go out with a large fleet and ask them to destroy the British fleet in Beirut at all costs. At the same time, order Ibrahim to drive the British into the sea at all costs. We must let the Osman agrees to our terms, Muhammad. Ali suddenly realized something was wrong and asked, "Where's Aspasha?" No one answered. "Where's Aspasha?" Ali asked again, but still no one answered. "Ah, you'll deaf. If you don't say anything, I'll kill you all." At this time, a court official finally crawled to the ground. "My lord, Aspasha was killed in battle, Muhammad." Ali's chest jumped suddenly, as if he had been hit by a heavy hammer. "Did the British do it?" No one answered. "Who did it?" Ali shouted. "Have no idea. Where is my fleet? Where is my fleet?" Ali roared with red eyes. He had already thought of the worst possibility, which was to be blown up directly in the dock. But it is almost impossible to blow up such a large natural cave. It is almost impossible to destroy so many ships at once. He still has a sense of luck being driven away. What, Muhammad? Ali suffered more from having his fleet become someone else's property than from having his fleet destroyed. He fell backwards into his throne. Muhammad Ali closed his eyes and recalled his military career. From an orphan begging on the roadside, he gradually became a dominant overlord. It took him 8 years of hard work. For this, he did not hesitate to bear the name of a tyrant, and even sacrificing the future of Egypt. But at this moment, she made a wedding dress for others. Egypt's borrowing from France allowed the former to develop rapidly in a short period of time, but once defeated, the latter would be completely overwhelmed by debt. Finally Ali spit out a mouthful of black blood and fell down on his back. Ibrahim, who was on the Syrian front line, actually began to lead his troops to storm Beirut without waiting for Ali's order, hoping to recapture this important city from the British army. However, the 20,000 elite troops under his command were never able to capture the city, where 2,000 Sequoia troops were stationed. Compared with the fighting power of the Sequoia army, what surprised him even more was that the residents of Beirut actually sided with the British. These damn traitors, the lackeys of the infidels. Ibrahim was frustrated on both sides at this time, and his logistics had been harassed by the guerrillas. Although he did not know the situation at sea, he was sure that everything was terrible now. Istanbul, Grand Sarajevo Palace. Majid couldn't believe his ears. The British used half of the opponent's forces to annihilate the Egyptian navy, and then the Austrians intercepted the hidden strength of the Egyptian navy. Majid has been called a genius since he was a child, but now he suddenly feels that his brain is not enough. The amount of information really exceeded the limit he could bear, but Majid understood that the old man Metternich was not just talking. The Austrians were indeed powerful, and he must now reconsider his relations with European countries. But in any case, the Ottoman crisis should be resolved this time. Egypt, which has lost its navy, can only choose to withdraw its troops, otherwise it will be cut off by the navy. The 130,000 Egyptian expeditionary force will have no bones left, and can only be turned into the Syrian desert of Dust. Although the Egyptians were finished, the Ottoman Empire's war potential was also finished. And those crazy pagans in the north will definitely not miss this opportunity and make unreasonable demands on the weak Ottoman. Majid felt that perhaps he could use the power of the Austrian Empire to check and balance the terrible Russia. Moreover, there are many Slavs in Austria. The excuses used by Russia against the Ottoman Empire are likely to be used against the Austrians. According to Majid's prediction, after the Austrians got the bad land in Bosnia, they should no longer be interested in the Ottoman land. After all, it was the worst land in the entire Ottoman state. Bandits were rampant on the barren land. The tough mountain people were either fighting or on the way to fights. so that taxation could not maintain local stability at all. Majid believed that Bosnia, the poisonous candy, would be able to stop Austria's ambitions in the Balkans. Moreover, according to his intelligence, except for a small number of Catholics in Bosnia, all Europeans in the Balkans were heretics to Austria. The leader of the heresy is of course a Russian. He knows very well that heresy is more terrifying than heresy, so he firmly believes in his judgment that the Austrians will definitely be willing to maintain his rule to counter Russian influence, and he will also start from the three fulcrums. Find true balance. The three fulcrums that Magid calls are Austria, Britain, and Russia. Ottoman is a region heavily influenced by religion. Although Magid and his father have been trying to weaken the influence of religion, they still cannot change their religious thinking. However, there were voices of opposition within the Austrian Empire. Chapter 186 Great Slavic Plan. Metternich, you lack of foresight. Is Belgrade so easy to get? Who gave you the right to sign such a stupid treaty? Although Count Korolev was a Croatian, he had no interest in the suffering of his countrymen. Count Korolev is a big Germanist. He is now more worried that Russia will take targeted measures after Austria obtains Belgrade and Bosnia. He felt that he would be able to bring down Metternich this time, but what he didn't know was that his words had offended the Austrian Imperial government all over. In fact, just as Count Korolev feared, although the Tsar ostensibly agreed to the deal, he still contacted Prussia. William IV was certainly willing to accept the Tsar's support. Although the Tsar once tricked Prussia during a food crisis and even indirectly caused the death of William III, under the strong pressure of Austria, an evil neighbor, Frederick, William IV was in urgent need of allies. On the other hand, as long as Britain and France do not continue to oppose Russia's hegemony in the Strait, Russia does not need to maintain its alliance with Austria. After all, what the Austrians took away was the land of the Slavs. As the Emperor of the Third Rome, sooner or later, all Slavic lands would be recovered. Nicholas I's ambition was never just hegemony of the Black Sea. Nicholas I nominally wanted to regain Constantinople and fulfill the nearly 500-year dream of the Third Roman Empire, but in fact he wanted the entire Balkans and all the land bordering Russia. When Alexander I was still on the throne, Nicholas once proposed a Slavic plan, which aimed to establish a Slavic empire from the Elbe River to the Near East, from the Adriatic Sea to the Arctic Ocean, but it was rejected because it was too crazy. Now that Nicholas I had become Tsar, no one could veto his proposals. In order to realize the West Slav plan, under the instruction of the Tsar, experts in St. Petersburg and Moscow cooperated with a special Section 3 to prepare a pamphlet and disseminate it everywhere. They advocated the establishment of a pan-Slavic alliance to confront Europe. Under the pretext of liberating various Slavic brothers and protecting Orthodox Christians from persecution, Russia brainwashed the people of the Balkans. This booklet has 6 core contents. First, all Slavs must be liberated, and the areas in which they live must be merged with Russia. Second, this alliance must include Constantinople, along with its surrounding Sea of Marmara, the Bosporus, and the Adriatic. Third, Constantinople would serve as the third capital of the alliance. Fourth, the Pan-Slavic alliance must be loyal to the Tsar, who was the leader of the alliance, and the other kingdoms were ruled by monarchs chosen by the Tsar. Fifth, the alliance will include 8 kingdoms: Tsarist Russia, Kingdom of Bohemia, Moravia, Slovakia, Kingdom of Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Kingdom of Bulgaria, Kingdom of Romania, Kingdom of Hungary, Kingdom of Greece, Kingdom of Constantinople. Sixth, Poland, Albania, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus and Ukraine should be directly subordinate to Russia. Although this plan seemed absurd at the time, Russia never gave up on realizing it in the hundreds of years after it was proposed. Corresponding to the West Slavic plan, there is also the East Slavic plan, but it involves some areas and is not discussed in this book. In order to realize the glory and dream of the Romanov family, there must be a war between Russia and Austria. Moldova and Wallachia, the 2 Danube principalities, were already Russian protectorates at this time, and were blocked by the Carpathian Mountains, so that Tsar did not think that Austria would attack these 2 areas. Therefore, Austria has only one eastward direction, and since Belgrade, the key to the Balkans, has fallen into its hands, Serbia has become the last barrier to prevent the Austrian Empire from encroaching on the Balkans. Russia will naturally provide it with military training and sell it advanced weapons and technology. But it is still a bit naive to rely on Serbia alone to block Austria. Therefore, Russia must strongly support Prussia and make it an important force to contain Austria. Although the Austrians used their actions and words to tell the world that their focus was on the Italian peninsula, the Tsar would not believe this. He only believed in his own judgment. The short-lived alliance between Russia and Austria was nothing more than a deal reached between Russia, which wanted to dominate the Straits, and Austria, which wanted to seize Belgrade. Historically, Russia's military assistance to the Ottomans in 1833 actually turned the Black Sea into a Russian lake. In the secret terms of the Russian-Turkish Alliance Treaty, the Ottoman Empire recognized that the Black Sea Strait was open to Russian warships, and for the benefit of Russia, it blocked the Dardanelles Strait and prohibited the fleets of any other country from entering the Black Sea Strait at any time and under any pretext. Coupled with the misguidance of Nasserlov, a pro-British faction, Russia always believed that they had the possibility of peace and joint hegemony with Britain. And Austria was their biggest enemy. In this life, with the intervention of France, Britain was unable to get Russia to give up the Russian-Turkish alliance. So Russia still maintained its hegemony in the Black Sea and control of the straits. This made the Russians take it for granted that the British were no longer their main threat in the Near East, but Austria, a traditional land power like them, was. As a result, they began to defend Austria strictly, but the British, who had not achieved their goal, were not satisfied. Expelling the French forces only achieved half of their goal. What the British want is hegemony in the Near East. Neither France nor Russia can remain. Historically, attacking Austria was just a convenient move. Now that the Egyptian navy has been destroyed, it is only a matter of time before it surrenders. The French influence in the Near East has basically been reduced to zero. The only one left that can compete with Britain for hegemony in the Near East is Russia. As for the so-called Russian-Turkish alliance, it is nothing more than a piece of waste paper that can be discarded at any time. I'm afraid the only ones who believe that this paper pact will work are the Russians themselves. Historically, under Palmerston's skillful operation, he used the London Conference to successfully formulate the Straits Convention, which abolished the Russian privileges in the Bosporus and Dardanelles. Instead, the Black Sea Strait was placed under the supervision of the international community, which directly ruined the Russians' efforts for nearly a century, and also left a lot of controversial issues, which eventually became one of the triggers of the Crimean War. Although Canning, the temporary foreign secretary, was not as radical as Palmerston, he was well aware of the Russian threat after having worked in the Ottoman Empire for a long time. If Britain wants to maintain its position as the world's maritime hegemon, it must not allow Russia to break out of the Black Sea. But the top priority is to force Egypt to surrender. As for unilateral sanctions on Russia, it is impossible. The best way is to convene another meeting of the 5 countries to discuss how to deal with Russia. Chapter 187 Objection is invalid. With Palmerston's lesson learned, the British no longer plan to hold a meeting on their own territory, and the purpose of this meeting is to defeat Russia and France, so Paris and St. Petersburg must be excluded, and the only option left is Berlin, Vienna, and Istanbul. Among them, Istanbul is considered the British home court, but in order to win over Austria, they can only choose Vienna. Viscount Stratford, Cunning, will also go to Vienna to discuss matters related to the convening of the 5 Nations Conference with Metternich. Vienna, Regency Council. Although Count Korolov strongly opposed it, within Austria, whether it was the military or the civil servants, most were excited about the possibility of regaining Belgrade. In history, Austria has recaptured Belgrade 3 times, and each time represents the highlight moment of the empire. Reminding people of great names such as Prince Eugen and Joseph II. And Friedrich's good news gave great confidence within the Austrian Empire. After all, Austria did not have a real fleet before. Listen to the name of the Austrian main fleet, and you will understand what kind of navy this is. The Danube Fleet, the Rhine Fleet. There is no doubt that they were originally river fleets. In fact, the Austrian Navy has never had a separate organization. They are more like an auxiliary branch of the army. Even the generals of the navy were once held by the army. In the Austrian Empire, there were very few professional naval generals like Friedrich. With this glorious victory, the navy has the qualifications to form an independent army. In fact, Austria began to form a navy after 1756, but its predecessor was the Danube Navy that had been fighting the Ottoman Empire for many years. In 1802, the first and only naval academy was established, but it was not until Archduke Friedrich. Before taking office, the navy was always commanded by the army. Friedrich also became the first vice admiral in the history of the Austrian Empire. At Franz's strong suggestion, Friedrich established his naval headquarters in Trieste. In fact, according to Friedrich, Venice was the best port in Austria at this time. But Franz knew very well that Venice's development potential was not great, and its throughput was not even half that of the unpopular port of Trieste. And during the storm of 1848, the city would fall, and the Austrian army, under the command of General Reich, surrendered the city without firing a shot. The last ones to resist were a group of Italian sailors who refused to surrender. They built barricades on the pier and all died. After fighting fiercely for a day and night with the rebels, in the end, the Venetians captured 90% of Austria's ships, so much so that the Kingdom of Sardinia dared to blockade the Adriatic Sea with only 2 battleships. After all, Franz didn't know that Archdeacon Friedrich would dissolve in water just before the storm came. Historically, Archduke Friedrich drowned in 1847. The newly appointed naval commander chose to vacation in Belgium to escape the storm of 1848. After the turmoil ended, he was awarded the rank of marshal and lived until he was more than 80 years old. The original purpose of Trieste was to be used as a military port. The defense here is no worse than Venice, and the troops are relatively loyal. Coupled with the construction of the railway, the potential here is huge. The 19 battleships brought back from Egypt can be reborn as long as they are equipped with steam power. Although this fleet is not enough for Austria to dominate the Mediterranean, it is enough for countries such as Britain and France to no longer dare to underestimate Austria's maritime strength. There is no need for the Church's ship to flaunt and deceive under the banner of France and Spain. In the past, merchant ships of the Austrian Church could fly under the French flag to avoid pirate harassment as much as possible. With this fleet, Austria can send its original frigates to protect merchant ships. Although merchant ships have guns and combat personnel, Austrian warships cruising on the ocean can greatly enhance the influence of the Austrian Empire. Governor's Palace of Bosnia. Abidal Pasha had just received Majid's order that he could withdraw from Bosnia, and he couldn't wait to pack up his belongings and prepare to run away. It is said that 3 years to clear the governor's office and 100,000 snowflakes of silver. However, Abidal served as governor of Bosnia for 3 years. Apart from more than 20 assassinations, he received nothing. Even the guards had to pay for themselves. There are actually only more than 4,000 soldiers out of the 8,000 under his command. This is not because he is on free pay, but because his men often go on strike, and he can only rely on money to solve these problems. Of course, Abidal couldn't pay for it himself, so he could only use military pay. Although this is the territory of the Xian Fang sect, the locals eat pork like the damn pagans. The Xian Fang sect considers pork to be unclean food, which makes Abidal feel disgusted. The local Bosniaks and Serbs both followed the patriarchal system, and the ethnic groups formed villages and often resisted paying taxes or blocking roads and robberies if troops are sent to suppress it. If few people go, they may not be able to defeat the local armed forces and may be surrounded and suppressed by nearby villages. If too many people go, those people will dig into the ravine, and the army will have no choice but to return without success. And the mountain people are tough and fierce, and they are not afraid of death when fighting. Most of their companions are related by kinship. Killing one of them will lead to crazy revenge from a group of people. Bosnia is located at the border between Austria and the Ottoman Empire. Although frictions between the two countries continue, trade has never stopped for a day, but only in the form of smuggling. Smugglers hire a large number of desperados to travel between the two countries in order to make huge profits, and the government, soldiers and bandits hope to get a piece of the pie. As a result, the blood on this land has never dried up for a moment, and even many local young people yearn for the kind of life of fighting. Conspiracy and betrayal. The most direct result of this situation is that the entire Bosnia region cannot collect much tax. In fact, Majid himself still hoped that a Baitul Pasha could resist to some extent, and it would be best to die for his country, so that he would appear heroic and the Ottoman Empire would be better off. The locals in Bosnia are really not very loyal to the Ottoman Empire. Most of their ancestors were Christians, but they were conquered by the Ottomans in 1463. In order to become true Ottomans and enjoy their rights, they converted to Shia and Fang Christianity. Of course, there were also some immigrants from other places in the Ottoman Empire. At this time, Bosniaks were the second largest ethnic group in the area. After hearing the news that Austria was about to annex Bosnia, a considerable number of them were ready to leave this pagan land and return to the Ottoman Empire. But the attitude of most people is to prepare to welcome Master Wang and change their teaching and close at the same time. The local Serbians have their own ideas. Some people think that joining the Austrian Empire is a good thing. After all, they will become civilized people from now on. At least they will be better off than in the Ottoman Empire. But some people don't think so. They feel that heresy and paganism are all the same, and it is very likely that the land will be remeasured and they will be asked to pay taxes. This is not a good thing for the local gentry with certain strength. Soon they heard that Austria was preparing to split Bosnia into and hand over East Bosnia to Serbia in exchange for Belgrade. Chapter 188. Objection is invalid. Belgrade, Congress Hall. Franz was sitting in the main seat, looking a little embarrassed. Under the stage was the 17-member parliament that once held the highest power in Serbia, but at this time there were only 14 people left. There are serious differences within the Austrian government regarding the ownership of the glory of recovering Belgrade. Should a certain general accept it? It seems that no one has this qualification. Glory to the royal family. The only person whose age and identity match the question is Archduke Karol's eldest son, Archduke Albrecht. However, Archduke Friedrich has just achieved great success, and now it seems inappropriate to let his elder brother get the glory of recapturing Belgrade. Based on the emperor's physical condition, he might have ascended to heaven before he arrived in Belgrade. Even if he arrived in Belgrade, he would not be able to embody the majesty of the royal family and make the locals surrender. The emperor's younger brother seems to be similar and can only have some counterproductive effects. Metternich and Count Korolov searched the royal family and found that Grand Prince Franz Joseph was a suitable candidate. As a result, Franz was loaded onto the ship overnight and sent to the Novi Sad fortress. Austria's 80,000 strong army entered Serbia in a mighty manner and headed straight for Belgrade. The Serbs along the way neither stood in the way to welcome them nor fled away. They didn't seem to care about this at all. Fights occurred twice, but both were one-sided defeats. Franz looked at the endless army in front of him and behind him, and he couldn't even understand why those Serbs jumped out to fight. In recent years, Serbia has produced at least dozens of kings, large and small. The members of the 17-member council have changed several times. All these troops can do is collect grain and capture young men. However, almost all the young people in the villages along the way have been recruited, and the remaining women are just plowing the fields mechanically. In fact, generally speaking, when the Austrian army goes to conquer other countries' lands, it will send some quartermasters to buy local grain and specialties at high prices to show the kindness of the Habsburg family and to win people's hearts. However, what surprised the quartermasters was that no one took the initiative to sell things. Now they had no choice but to buy them themselves. But when they came to the village on their tall horses and a group of infantry, there were only a group of old men and women standing at the end of the village holding farm tools, looking like they were going to fight the soldiers desperately. Fortunately, they were just a group of old men and women. If they were a group of young men, I'm afraid they would have been corpses all over the place. The leading officer suppressed the raised muzzle of the soldier beside him and called a messenger who knew Serbian. Tell them that we want to buy some food, wine, livestock, fodder, wood, gold, silver, weapons, ammunition, and horses for them to take. After a while the messenger came back on horseback. They said they didn't want any money and asked us to get our things and leave quickly, not to enter their village. The officer was actually quite helpless. If it hadn't been for repeated orders from above and the royal family sitting in charge, he would have ordered a food grab. Damn. Look at what's edible in this field and load it into the car quickly. Don't step on your horse to chop branches. Can that thing be used as firewood? The officer took out a bag and handed it to the orderer. Go and settle the bill with those damn guys and give them the remaining money as a tip. A bunch of idiots are trying to get some luck from above. These people really don't know how to behave. Bad luck. The march along the way can only be described as deserted. However, in the carriage, Baron Camp, the diplomat sent by Metternich, was talking nonsense. At one moment he said that he had been to the North Pole and climbed the Himalayas. At another moment he said that he had wiped out entire Indian tribes by driving cattle on the Great Plains of North America. At another moment he said that he had seen the Golden City in the Amazon rainforest and how he was in Singapore. 137 million with $2 in a casino. At the same time, he showed great courtesy to Ajani who came with Franz. Ajani, who has been with Franz all year round, has already surpassed the women of her generation in knowledge, and she only finds Mr. Kemp's boasting ridiculous. Mr. Kemp feels that he is very attractive and is a veteran in love. He has never seen a woman who is not interested in him. So he thought that the other party must be playing hard to get, and Archduke Franz beside him was so drowsy that he seemed about to fall asleep. Then Mr. Kemp became more and more bold. Ajani glanced at Franz, who nodded. Then I saw Ajani lifting up her skirt. Just when Mr. Kemp wanted to see what was going on, Ajani kicked him out of the carriage. Why did you lift up your skirt before kicking someone? Are you going to fulfill his last wish? Franz didn't care about Mr. Kemp who flew out. After all, he was the one who caused his own trouble. No, it's very inconvenient to kick someone while wearing a skirt. You'll know after wearing it once. Ajani teased. But before she could finish speaking, a scream came from outside, interrupting their conversation. Theoretically speaking, the carriage is not traveling very fast, and there is a dirt road below. Even if it flies out, there will be no problem. At most, it will be a little embarrassing. However, Mr. Kemp, who flew out, did not stand up in time. The horse behind him did not stop and stepped on his third leg. Mr. Kemp's body was now covered in blood, and he was unconscious after some rescue efforts. Mr. Kemp's life was saved, but he may lose his happiness and the rest of his life, and he will not be able to participate in scheduled negotiations as a result. The negotiations could only be chaired by Franz. Franz read out the conditions of the Austrian Empire and the specific procedures for the exchange. Austria took Bosnia from the Ottomans under the pretext of saving the Catholics, and now used it to exchange Belgrade with Serbia. This series of operations made everyone in the Serbian Assembly of 17 a little dizzy. But one thing they know very well is that they only need to pay one province in exchange for 3 provinces. Not only that, the residents of those 3 provinces are still mainly Serbs, and the Austrian Empire has promised the Serbs in West Bosnia the freedom to go and stay, and will not hinder them. The 17-member parliament originally thought that the Austrian Empire would take the opportunity to annex Serbia, or establish a puppet regime loyal to Austria and forcibly dissolve the Serbian parliament. But now they feel that they have made a lot of money, and their land and population have almost doubled. And the price they have to pay is just one Belgrade. The 17-member parliament readily signed the treaty, but Miloš, who had always been considered a pro-Austrian, did not sign. Miloš himself fully believed that the Austrian Empire would support him as the Grand Duke of Serbia and give him various promises. However, now the Austrians have not mentioned a word about who will be the Grand Duke of Serbia. And they even want to take away Belgrade, the land of Serbia's prosperity. As a big Serbian, Miloš could not accept all this. I object. Miloš mustered up his courage. Objection is invalid. Franz did not want Austria to make the same mistake again, and he would not allow his own flesh and blood to be fed to a poisonous snake. Chapter 189. You are not important. Then I will refuse to accept the position of Grand Duke of Serbia. Miloš Obrenović was preparing to make a last stand for the greater Serbian Empire in his heart. According to Miloš's estimation, the Austrians must need him as the Grand Duke to stabilize the situation in Serbia. After all, this is in Austria's interests. Only a stable Serbia can allow the Austrians to better colonize economically. Moreover, Milos saw that the representative of the Austrian side was a brat, so he subjectively thought that, as long as he was stronger, he could scare the other party into pissing their pants, or at least make the other party panic, if they didn't play according to the routine. But in fact, in Franz's eyes, Milos is just a clown, always dreaming of having the best of both worlds. In Franz's heart, Serbia is not a sheep, but a rabbit at most. The total economic volume is similar to that of the small states in Italy, and is not even 1/10 of the Kingdom of Sardinia. The annual tax revenue was only a few 100,000 florins, while the fiscal revenue of the Austrian Empire at this time was as high as 200 million florins. Milos's words really shocked many people. The 17-member council even thought that this old guy was crazy. There was no reason to refuse such a generous offer. The accompanying Austrian officials were also shocked. As a diplomat, Baron Camp had his third leg trampled by a horse, and now they were a little confused as to what to do. After all, the task assigned to them by the Regency Council was to help Archduke Franz complete the treaty with Serbia as soon as possible while guarding Belgrade. Then, let's replace him, Franz said lightly. Franz's words shocked everyone around him. Only his attendant Ajani still poured coffee for the Grand Duke without any trouble. The Serbian side thought that the Austrian Empire was the reinforcement invited by Milos, while the Austrian side thought that this was too much fun. Wouldn't the treaty signed in this way become a waste of paper? Milos couldn't believe his ears at all. He, the Grand Duke of Serbia, was recognized by the Ottoman Empire, and he also had the support of Russia. He suddenly remembered that he was dismissed precisely because he had been disobeying the Tsar's will. Before that, Milos used Karajal's head to gain the trust of the Ottoman Sultan, and then used the Austrians to make Serbia an independent country. Then they used the help of the Russians to eradicate the pro-Austrian faction. Milos thought that Austria would be very willing to accept a smart ally like him, and would support him and help him regardless of past grudges. Franz has no interest in this kind of rat that jumps repeatedly. As for the treaty, a treaty without strength as a backing is a piece of waste paper. The rights of the Serbian Grand Duke have long been emptied by the 17-member parliament and recognized by the Ottoman Empire. Otherwise, Milos would not have been put under house arrest, let alone ask for help from the Austrian Empire. So it actually doesn't matter whether the treaty is signed by the Grand Duke or not. And Franz doesn't care whether Serbia is in chaos or not. Even if they were annexed by the Ottoman Empire again, it would be none of Austria's business. As for the so-called orthodoxy, there is no so-called orthodoxy in Serbia. It is true that as long as Milos is here, Serbia will not fall to Russia. But without him, it would not be easy for Russia to enter Serbia. The newly appointed Sultan will never allow the Ottoman Empire to be surrounded by Russia. He will definitely try his best to undermine Russia's united front. At the same time, although Serbia is in disarray, localism is strong in the mountains, and Vučić, the agent chosen by the Russians, is a reckless man. The internal conflicts between the two parties must be very fierce. Coupled with the large number of local forces brought by the three provinces of East Bosnia, it is hard to say who will win under the competition between all parties. East Bosnia refers to Turaz, Sarajevo, Foča. Milos can indeed be called a hero of Serbia and a founder of Yugoslavia, but his hero is my enemy. Franz is not interested in such things as capitalizing on enemies. Even if they are weak enemies, they are still enemies. Milos shouted angrily, "You dare! You dare! I'm the Grand Duke of Serbia, personally proclaimed by the Sultan." Franz just waved his hand. The Sultan said, "This is already Austrian land." Ajani asked the soldiers to drive Milos out of the Serbian Parliament Hall. Of course, if this treaty is signed by the Grand Duke of Serbia, it will naturally appear more complete. So Franz asked, "Which of you wants to be the Grand Duke of Serbia?" The members of the 17-member council suddenly fell silent, partly out of shock, partly because they did not understand what the young man in front of them meant. They couldn't see through the young man in front of them. Because they didn't understand, they were afraid. These people couldn't avoid the pie falling from the sky. Franz had no choice but to settle for the next best thing. "Who do you think is suitable to be the Grand Duke of Serbia?" The Members of the 17-member council finally breathed a sigh of relief and spoke freely. But among the people they mentioned, there was no doubt that Milis's son, Mikhail, was the most suitable candidate. Unlike his father, Mikhail is a coward. Historically, Princess Mikhail voluntarily gave up his rights. There is no doubt that he is an unqualified politician. He prefers pleasure to intrigue. Soon, Mikhail signed under the coercion and inducement of the 17-member parliament and succeeded him as the new Grand Duke of Serbia. His first order was to move the capital to Sarajevo and at the same time ordered the Serbian army and government to withdraw from Belgrade and hand it over to the jurisdiction of the Austrian Empire. Franz was very satisfied with the result. After all, he designed the entire plan. However, the immigration plan did not go as smoothly as expected because the Serbs and Bosnians in West Bosnia both had their own industries and they were unwilling to give up their land. At the same time, the Serbs also showed their crazy side, just like the massacre that occurred during the partition of India and Pakistan. What started as a robbery of Bosnians heading to the Ottoman Empire soon turned into a massacre of all outsiders, whether those people wanted to leave Western Bosnia, or whether they wanted to go to the Ottoman Empire. Whether they were Bosnians or Serbs. Just when the Serbs in East Bosnia were killing each other, the immigrants from Belgrade arrived. These immigrants were more ferocious and had more advanced weapons than the mountain people who were good at fighting. It was a more brutal massacre. The chicken contest has begun. Western Bosnia was classified as a royal territory due to Hungary's firm opposition. As a separate area, it needed a governor, and the governor was the later famous Croatian royalist leader, General Jelac. Although this position is not high, it is an honor for a Croatian, because he will become the protector of those saved Croatians at the same time. This is something worth celebrating for the entire Croatian nation. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 190, Division of East and West. West Bosnia. There are 150,000 Croatians in West Bosnia, accounting for 35% of the total local population. However, after a large number of Bosniaks and Serbs left, they became the largest ethnic group here. As for East Bosnia, there are almost no Croatians living there, so they don't have to suffer the pain of migration, let alone participate in the unlimited chicken competition. These people used to be called Raja, which means cattle, which is the so-called third-class people. In the past, the first-class people were obviously Bosniaks, the second-class people were the larger number of Serbs, and the third-class people were the Croats. Rothians historically, in order to maintain the stability of rule during the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they did not Austrianize this area. Instead, they tried to maintain the original status quo and even strengthened the local traditional authority. Religious and patriarchal, this directly resulted in Bosnia becoming the poorest and most chaotic province in the entire Austro-Hungarian Empire, preceded by Dalmatia. The Croatians naturally welcomed joining the Austrian Empire. After all, they suddenly became first class, and the person sent to rule them was a Croatian general. Nowadays, the local Croats are really singing as serfs, and at the same time, their compatriots in the Austrian Empire have begun to support them. The Croatian region has always been a relatively poor province in Austria, but they still scrape together a large amount of food, weapons, and livestock to support their newly returned brothers. The Bosnians are in a worse situation. They either convert to become Croatians, go to East Bosnia to participate in the unlimited chicken competition, or they stay in place and are supported by the Croatians. Beaten. The local Serbs are similar. They can either choose to be obedient citizens of the Austrian Empire, or go to New Serbia and want to continue fighting against the country. Austria has many troops that are good at mountain warfare waiting for them. In the Belgrade area, Austria deployed heavy troops to defend it, preparing to turn it into a truly impregnable city. As for the Austrian newspapers, they will not mention the transaction between the Austrian Empire and Serbia, but will only write about Archduke Franz leading the army to regain Belgrade. The Hungarians have always considered the Croats to be a great threat. to themselves, because their territory is too large. They have the same military tradition as Hungary, and they are also rich in allied troops. Hungary never gave up on suppressing Croatia, whose land area was second only to Hungary in the area of St. Stephen's Crown Point. However, the population of the latter is only about 1/3 that of Hungary, and the population growth rate is even more ridiculously slow. From 2.4 million people at the beginning of the 19th century to just over 3 million at the end of the 19th century. You must know that the 19th century was a period of explosive population growth in Europe. During the same period, Germany's population doubled. If Western Bosnia were included in the Kingdom of Croatia, it would further strengthen its power. As a result, it would be more difficult for Hungary, which was already weak, to rule Croatia. Of course, the Hungarians will definitely not agree, and will even obstruct it in every possible way, which will further intensify the conflict between Croatia and Hungary. In the eyes of the Croatians, merging with West Bosnia was saving their brothers. There was absolutely no reason for the Hungarians to interfere. Hungary's third trick in dealing with Croatia is to suppress Croatian officials, increase land rents and taxes, and at the same time throw dirty water on Croatia, saying that they are ready to become independent, and then take the opportunity to arrest some Croats. Officer Escher. In fact, a large amount of arable land and pasture in Croatia is in the hands of Hungarians, but the people responsible for farming and grazing are Croatians. There are indeed many people in Croatia who are officials in Hungary. After all, they belong to the Crown territory of St. Stephen. And for ordinary Croatian officials, this is the only way they can get promoted. At the same time, except for a few local defense forces, most of the military was also controlled by Hungary. And they really have no intention of rebelling, so they can be manipulated by Hungary every time. However, at this time, due to the opposition of Hungary, Western Bosnia became a royal territory, and as the Governor-General Jelay could use various legitimate reasons to transfer grain and other materials from Vojvodina via Croatia. At the same time, civil servants no longer need to look at Hungary's face for promotion. They can enter the royal territory and then be promoted directly to Nilitania as an official like Count Korolaf. The registration office for the Imperial army in West Bosnia was almost overcrowded. After all, joining the St. Stephen's Champions team in Croatia only cost 43 florins, while joining the Imperial army could receive 100 florins. The East-West partition was the best way to convert Western Bosnia into Austrian territory in a short period of time. Croatia has a shortcoming, that is, it is poor, with barren land, scant products, lack of important resources, and even cannot be self-sufficient in food for a long time. Almost all Croatian men during this period joined the Austrian Empire's army because being a soldier could provide a stable income to support their families and receive a pension if they died in battle. It is precisely because of this that the Croatians never thought of independence from the empire. There is no need to worry about the fact that the Hungarians may take advantage of the food problem in Croatia, because the rich Vojvodina can definitely feed the entire Croatia. If this is not possible, it can continue to be transported through the Danube waterway. As Hungarian sanctions intensify and the Croatians' dependence on Hungary weakens, the conflicts between the two sides will become more and more serious. As for the importance of Belgrade, I have said it many times before and will not repeat it again. One of the bigger impacts is that Austria's southeastern defense focus will be transferred from Novi Sad to Belgrade. East Bosnia. The massacre of outsiders by Serbian natives came to an abrupt end with the arrival of an envoy from Belgrade. This messenger was none other than Miloš. He was not resigned to defeat, and the Serbs in East Bosnia were unwilling to accept a new government. The two hit it off immediately, but the Serbian army was not a decadent and incompetent army like the Ottomans. What the Serbian army is best at is guerrilla warfare, and for this, they need allies to jointly fight against the powerful Serbian army. At first the Bosnians thought this was a trap, but as soon as the Serbian army entered East Bosnia, a fierce conflict broke out between the two sides on the frontal battlefield. The Bosnians were no match for the Serbs, so on the one hand, they caught the strong men who migrated from West Bosnia everywhere, and on the other hand, they also extended an olive branch to Miloš. But the coalition forces in East Bosnia were still no match for the Serbian army. The coalition forces can only turn to underground guerrilla warfare, and at the same time, they are even more frantic to capture young men. The Serbian army that suffered losses also needed to recruit strong men to replenish its troops. Although their nominal monarch was Miloš's son, it was a 17-member parliament that actually controlled the power naturally. The 17-member council will not let Miloš succeed, because this is not only related to their rights, but also related to their lives as the ultimate victim of this unrestricted chicken eating contest. The West Bosnians were unwilling to be slaughtered by others and formed their own teams to counterattack. In fact, the 17-member parliament was forced to do so, because after surrendering Belgrade, Serbia's original land was no longer safe to defend. Sarajevo in East Bosnia is not only a Serbian settlement, but also a fortified city that is easy to defend, but difficult to attack, and Miloš fled there. The Parliament of 17 had no choice but to capture it. East Bosnia was nominally Ottoman territory. Although a deal was made between Austria and Serbia, it was not recognized by the local indigenous people. At first, the Parliament of 17 believed that, as long as the local Bosniaks were eliminated, the local Serbs would be willing to accept them. Unexpectedly, it backfired, and the Serbs and Bosnians in East Bosnia joined forces to defend Sarajevo. This time Serbia became the aggressor, but they had to fight. Because they originally wanted to leave a blank land for the Austrian Empire. The 17-member parliament moved as many local people as possible from Belgrade and promised them a better life. An unlimited chicken eating contest means that on the side of the road, in the rice fields, or in the alleys of the city, no matter day or night, men, women, the elderly, and even children may become your enemies. This kind of battle has a great impact on the morale of the army. It was a heavy blow, and also a kind of mental torture. However, misfortune never comes singly, and Vučić, who has been silent for a long time, once again raised the flag of rebellion. This time he wanted to overthrow Miloš and the 17-member council. Vučić was an agent supported by the Russians, but his success failed due to misjudgment of the situation. Chapter 191. The Jews want to establish a nation. Austrian Empire, Vienna. As soon as Viscount Stratford arrived in Vienna, he received news that Austria was sending troops to Western Bosnia. This did not surprise him, because it was not uncommon for great powers to take advantage of the situation. The key is that the Austrians started so quickly. Are they convinced that Egypt will definitely lose, or do they plan to join forces with Egypt and other countries to cover up the Ottomans? Just when Viscount Stratford was puzzled, he got the news that the Austrian Imperial Navy had evacuated the Egyptian Navy's secret base, and he couldn't help but gasp. Viscount Stratford couldn't believe his ears. The Egyptians actually still had a fleet. If they directly sent all their fleets to attack Vice Admiral Simmons, the outcome of the Second Beirut naval battle would be difficult to predict. And what's going on with the Austrian Navy? Isn't that a river fleet? How did they capture more than a dozen battleships? Here is an explanation of why Viscount Stratford didn't know about Austria's interception of the Egyptian Navy until he arrived in Vienna. Because Viscount Stratford left Istanbul after receiving the news of the British naval victory. At this time, maritime information exchange was extremely poor, and the news of the Austrian Navy arrived later than the news of the British naval victory. However, what Viscount Stratford wants to think about at this time is not how the Austrians succeeded, but what can be done now to maximize the interests of Britain. The Austrians and Russians can do so in the name of religion and nation, but the British obviously cannot do so. But this will not trouble the clever Viscount Stratford, and even less will it trouble Palmerston, who has been planning for many years. Palmerston wrote a letter to Viscount Stratford. Today, there is a strong idea among Jews all over Europe. The time has come for the Jewish nation to return to Palestine. It is very important that the Turkish Sultan should encourage the Jews to return to Palestine and settle down, because the wealth brought by the Jews will increase the resources at Sudan's disposal. If the Jews return under the invitation and protection of the Sultan, they will in the future thwart any malignant attempts by Muhammad Ali or his successors. I must ask His Excellency the Ambassador to strongly recommend that the Turkish government do everything in its power to encourage the Jews of Europe return to Palestine. Viscount Stratford and Palmerston hit it off, allowing the Jews to return to the ancient country where their ancestors lived, so that the British Empire would establish a colony in the center of the Ottoman land. According to the estimation of Viscount Stratford, many Jews will admire the powerful British Empire, and they will be willing to become Britain's allies, and in this area, where Xian Fang religion is prevalent, their ally can only be Britain. Palmerston believed that after the Jews entered the Ottoman Empire in large numbers, they would encroach on the collapsing empire. In the end, the Jews will work hard to keep the empire alive for their own benefit, and this is the purpose of the British. The Times ran a headline article reporting on plans to return Jews to their homes, saying the plan was receiving serious political consideration, but everyone knows the integrity of the Times. During the Sino-Japanese War, £600 was bought by the Japanese. Reports ignored the facts and even ignored British interests, while Palmerston and Viscount Stratford were building momentum for the Jewish state. The Times devoted a full page to reporting how Western Bosnia was oppressed by the Ottomans, and that the Austrian Empire was to safeguard the world. Justice and peace had no choice but to accept Western Bosnia. Since Westerners did not like the Ottomans in the first place, and seeing overwhelming evidence, people in Britain immediately became indignant and called for support for Austria to save Bosnia. Coupled with the fact that Vice Admiral Helmut's fleet was almost completely wiped out, the British's anti-war sentiment was rising, and they even demanded to sever their alliance with the Ottoman Empire. Many politicians had to declare that they would carefully handle relations with the Ottomans and provide certain help to Bosnia. Even the Queen of England claimed that the barbaric monarch who abused civilized people would pay the price. Queen Victoria went to Viscount Melbourne and told him that the relationship between Britain and the Ottomans remained unchanged, but the Ottoman Sultan must apologize for his crimes and make the necessary concessions to be honest, even if the Queen does not find him. Viscount Melbourne plans to do so because the pressure of public opinion is too great. Viscount Melbourne did not want to give his political opponents an opportunity to attack him, and the interests of the Ottomans were not important, as long as they could defend the Near East for Britain. This overwhelming public opinion offensive only cost France £3,000. Later, donations from all over the world exceeded £100,000, of which Ottoman Sultan Mejid donated £10,000. To show that he was a civilized monarch. In history, the Anglo-Saxons were the ones who most liked to boast about the power of Jewish financial groups. However, the richest Jewish families are not very interested in the Jewish state. The Rothschilds, Fulfords, Sassoons, and Wallenbergs all have great power in their respective locations, and do not miss the desert where their ancestors lived. It seems that Palmerston's method of relying on the Jews to solve the Ottoman economic problems will not work. Of course, there are also Jews who are keen to establish a country in Palestine, such as the famous Baron Montefiore, who firmly believes that he is the reincarnation of Moses, and his duty is to lead the Jews back to their homeland. Montefiore's British title brought him great convenience, so that he could directly enter Muhammad Ali's palace to negotiate deals with him. The other party's toughness made Muhammad Ali think that the other party was an envoy from the United Kingdom. Not only did he entertain him with delicious food and drinks, but he also agreed to all Montefiore's requests. Then Montefiore went to the Ottoman palace and accused Megid of his incompetence face to face in the Grand Zeraquilio Palace. Due to Montefiore's identity and his image as a civilized person, the other party could not react. You can only accept the order in full. Montefiore demanded that the Sultan immediately release all the Jewish prisoners in the prison, which the Sultan reluctantly did without hesitation. So Montefiore brought a large number of Jewish criminals to Syria. At this time, Palestine was only a part of Syria. Before leaving the Ottoman Empire, Montefiore went to the palace again to force Sultan Mejid to sign an edict declaring that the Jews would enjoy equal treatment as Turkish subjects, and that every Jew would be given due compensation. The Ottoman Sultan, who was suffering from internal and external troubles, could only bow his head and sign the edict. Montefiore left the Grand Zeraquilio Palace with great satisfaction, and declared that this is the Magna Carta of the Jews in Ottoman territory. What Montefiore didn't know was that the prostrate Ottoman ministers were almost crushing their teeth and digging their fingers deeply into his own flesh. The young Sultan Mejid vowed to repay today's shame 100-fold. Chapter 192 A Show of Force. Austrian Empire, Vienna. Viscount Stratford, Canning's cousin, also named Canning, was sitting alone in the carriage. He had no intention of looking at the scenery outside the window because the heavy burden on his body almost crushed him. During this trip, he not only had to persuade Austria to side with Britain and suppress Egypt with all his strength to prevent Ali from making a comeback, but he also had to get Austria to support the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. At the same time, Austrians were also needed for land operations cooperation. The British army cannot afford another defeat, otherwise it would not be enough to ask all cabinet members to resign en masse to apologize for such a huge blame. If Russia's hegemony across the straits can be eliminated, then this Near East crisis will be considered a successful mission. In fact, Viscount Stratford's ambitions are not that big. If it were Palmerston, he would definitely involve Russia and France and solve Austria as well. In fact, the situation of the war is far less severe than these politicians imagined. At this time, the British lobster soldiers could be said to be invincible. Historically, 2,000 lobster soldiers, under the cover of 7 warships, drove Ibrahim's 30,000 troops out of Beirut. Although Ibrahim is now leading an army of 20,000 to besiege Beirut, the British soldiers in Beirut are not timid at all. Instead, the Navy held a banquet, and the lobster soldiers' army also received support from the locals, making the defense effortless. Ibrahim sent troops to attack 3 times, but each time he was defeated. On one occasion, the Anubis Legion even stormed into the city. However, this army, which was considered to be the servants of death, was driven out by the British with bayonets. The Legion of Anubis is a slave army that worships the god of death and regards Ali as the incarnation of Anubis, the god of death. But its combat effectiveness is just that. Ibrahim did not dare to continue the siege if he could not attack it for a long time. Because Beirut, as a sea channel, was cut off, the supply lines on the road were also constantly harassed. Once the British cut off the supply line to the Red Sea, the 130,000 Egyptian troops remaining in Syria will be in a desperate situation. However, in the eyes of London politicians, it is extremely dangerous. The British Army only has 2,000 troops in Beirut. Although the Royal Navy has more than 7,000 troops, they refuse to participate in the war and spend every day drinking near the port. You can ask them to join the war, but you will have to pay more. William Simon's resume can be described as glorious. He was once a crew member of the Victory and then started as a frigate captain. He experienced countless wars. Some people even proposed to let him be the commander of the North Sea Fleet, but he was rejected. He himself refused. But William Simond was also a troublesome general. He would only complete the tasks within his scope of responsibility, and often asked the government to reward his soldiers, or allow him to loot. Naturally, the British government would not be threatened by a general ordering his removal, and continued to send reinforcement to Beirut. However, the rising anti-war sentiment in the country, coupled with the previous disastrous defeat of Helmut, made the British government unable to bear another defeat. Viscount Stratford must convince the Austrian Empire to join the war as soon as possible in order to ensure victory in the war against Egypt. Viscount Stratford finally arrived at the meeting place, but Metternich seemed to have been waiting for a long time. Hello, Mr. Metternich. Stratford Canning, British Ambassador. I would like to first congratulate your country on its first naval victory in the history of your country. At this time, the accompanying British officials whispered to Viscount Stratford, Mr. Ambassador, the Austrian Empire has won many naval battles before. Oh, really? That's so embarrassing. I always thought that the Austrian Empire didn't have a navy. Viscount Stratford said a little apologetically, but his expression was a bit artificial. Metternich understood that British diplomats always like to give others a show of strength first. The British, who hold the world's maritime hegemony, always like to point their nostrils to the sky. Originally, this level of provocation would not work on someone like Metternich, but Franz has been brainwashing him, saying that the British bully the weak and fear the strong. Your kindness and politeness will be regarded as a sign of weakness by the other party, and they want to keep Austria. To achieve the fruits of victory, we cannot blindly compromise. Did you know? Pirates are very annoying. If you don't take the initiative to provoke them, they will provoke you. To deal with these annoying guys, countries usually hang them. Viscount Stratford certainly understood what Metternich meant by pirates. But he was the one who started it, so it's understandable that the other party would fight back hard. But he was not ready to give up. After all, his opponent was just a bad old man. Did you know? Pirates are actually very respectable because they are the pioneers of democracy and freedom, and they are the most fair-minded people in the world. We have never had pirates in the UK, only a group of maritime gentlemen with privateering licenses. Due to the influence of modern film and television works, our stereotype of pirates is that they smell of alcohol, have dirty and torn clothes, constantly greet other people's families with a hoarse voice, have iron or wooden prosthetics on their legs, and hold in their hands holding an old musket and a noisy parrot on his shoulder. But in fact, pirate leaders are usually elected democratically, and every pirate participates in voting, which truly achieves full participation. In addition, pirates not only rob homes, but also participate in trade, and usually have more decent clothes. Viscount Stratford felt that he was sure of victory, so he took out an expensive Cuban cigar and put it in his mouth. The entourage beside him quickly took out a box of the latest luxury matches with a click sound. The match was lit, exuding a faint aroma. Each match was made of olive branches, which can be said to be very expensive. However, these early matches had many problems. The first was that they tasted bad. The gases produced by the simultaneous combustion of antimony sulfide, potassium chlorate, gum and starch could often make people choke and cough. So much so that matches at the time often had a slogan on them: "Please try not to inhale the gas. People with sensitive lungs should not use this product." Mixing frankincense and myrrh into it will greatly reduce the odor produced when burning, but the price is a bit. At the same time, this kind of match also has a huge problem. That is, it is very flammable and may ignite with a slight bump. Therefore, Viscount Stratford must hand over such a dangerous thing to others. A box of such matches cost £5, which was equivalent to 4 to 5 months' salary of a British worker at this time. Viscount Stratford blew out a long smoke ring, and just as he was about to show off, he heard a pop sound, and as the metal box lid was opened, a flame burst out. Prince Metternich used the lighter given to him by Franz and lit his cigar. With a crisp metal impact, the flame was extinguished, and then he carefully put the lighter into his pocket. Legitimate pirates are still pirates, and true nobles will not become maritime gentlemen. Viscount Stratford knew that he could not get any benefits from Metternich, so he simply changed the subject. "Your Excellency, what did you just use?" "It's called a lighter. It was given to me by my student. It's a small toy." Metternich knew what the other party meant, and he didn't want to make the situation too tense. Rather than such a tense tit-for-tat conversation, he prefers to let both parties immerse themselves in dancing and wine. Chapter 193 Lighter. This is truly a miraculous invention. Compared with this work of art, the gun lighter and Professor Bellina's invention are simply ridiculously crude. Well, I'm also proud of having such an outstanding student. This was an era before the modern lighter was invented, and there were only two less common types of lighters. One is a gun type lighter. As the name suggests, it uses the same principle as a pistol. Not only is it very complicated to use, but it also has a battlefield smell, including gunpowder and gunpowder smoke. The other was invented by the German chemist Bellina, which uses the principle that hydrogen will ignite when it encounters platinum cotton. A small glass cylinder is filled with an appropriate amount of dilute sulfuric acid. An inner tube is installed in the cylinder. Zinc sheets are placed in the inner tube. The glass cylinder is equipped with a top cover. There are nozzles, platinum cotton and switches on the top cover. The zinc sheets in the inner tube are the contact of sulfuric acid produces hydrogen gas. The pressure generated by a certain amount of hydrogen discharges the sulfuric acid in the inner tube into the glass cylinder. When the switch is turned on, the hydrogen in the inner tube rushes to the platinum wool and catches fire. The pressure in the inner tube and the glass cylinder rebalances, and the sulfuric acid enters the inner tube again. reacts with zinc flakes to produce hydrogen. The most important thing is that this lighter is about the same size as a modern electric kettle, and it may explode at any time due to bumps and open flames. However, Europeans at that time still had a strong interest in this kind of thing, so they went further and further down the wrong path. Franz certainly did not have this kind of trouble, but for safety reasons, he did not use gasoline, but kerosene. Franz didn't want the biggest scapegoat in Austria's history to leave early, otherwise the huge scapegoat in 1848 would probably be difficult to divide. In order to enhance the style and taste, Franz specially mixed whale oil and kerosene, so that the smell of kerosene would not be too strong. As for the design style, Franz followed the more successful Zippo-Lite design concept in later generations. The all-metal shell even had a double-headed eagle logo engraved on it by a famous sculptor in Vienna. Speaking of men, they are really strange creatures. The sculptor did not ask for the reward from Franz, but asked for a lighter after the design of Franz lighter was sent to the Academy of Sciences. A group of smokers worked overtime and completed it in one day. Sure enough, love is the source of motivation. Let a group of smokers develop lighters. We really found the right person. Viscount Stratford admired after hearing Metternich's words. I didn't expect you to be a great inventor. No, it was my student who invented this, not me. I can only give him some political guidance. Metternich said modestly. To be able to create such a great invention and receive your guidance, it seems that your students are extraordinary. Viscount Stratford could only say something nice. After all, the other party had a tough attitude. If the matter fell apart, the loss was the British Empire. Britain was not an empire at this time, but the British Empire sounded much more imposing than the United Kingdom. It is indeed extraordinary. He is a member of the Austrian Empire's royal family. Mr. Cunning, why are you traveling to our country on behalf of your country? You might as well tell us. Although Metternich was very patient, he really didn't like the other party's poor flattery, so he simply went on the right track. Mainly because I'm afraid you'll call me stupid. Metternich got straight to the point, but Viscount Stratford was a little uncomfortable and continued to talk to himself. Dear Your Excellency, our two countries share many common interests. Looking at the whole of Europe, we are the only two countries who are willing to send troops to uphold justice and maintain order. Metternich nodded, and it seemed that the other party was somewhat sincere. Russia wants to send troops, but Britain does not agree. Metternich hoped that France would send troops to take the British retreat, but unfortunately their king was a softy. As for Prussia, nothing could be done but vote and protest. I believe that as long as our two countries join forces, we will be able to protect the interests of both parties to the maximum extent. France, Russia, and Prussia will definitely oppose your country's sudden dispatch of troops to Serbia and Bosnia. I think your country will definitely need us. British support, said Viscount Stratford. You are right, but I think the French will not give up their position easily and will definitely oppose your country's excessive punishment on Egypt. Moreover, the British are so aggressive this time that they will not hesitate to lose their troops. It is not just to preserve the integrity of the Ottoman Empire. Metternich deliberately emphasized the two key words of France and the loss of troops and generals. He believed that the British had suffered such heavy losses this time and would not be reconciled to it and would definitely have to make up for it elsewhere. Viscount Stratford cursed in his heart. Damn old fox, you really won't give in. Helmut, this idiot, really deserves to be hanged. Helmut's fiasco did bring disastrous consequences to British diplomacy. It has been a long time since European countries lost to a non-Western civilization. The Tories, opposition party, Conservative Party, seized this point and frantically attacked the incumbent Whig Party, which also expanded the impact of this naval battle. At the same time, some unscrupulous media also got involved. Under their hype, Helmut's failure was almost comparable to Napoleon's Battle of Waterloo. But in fact, Helmut's fleet can only be regarded as a branch of the North Sea Fleet, and it is still far away from the carotid artery. It's just that most politicians are not military strategists. They only know the impact of this fiasco, which has plunged the entire Whig party into crisis so much, so that the always gentle Viscount Melbourne threatened to put Helmut on trial and hang him on the gallows. It's just that the highest punishment for a defeated general in the British Navy is early retirement. As for the French people's problem, it's not a big problem, but it's not a small problem. France's attitude is an unavoidable issue in this Near East crisis after all. Without France's support for Egypt, Muhammad Ali would not have dared to attack the Ottoman Empire. It's just that France betrayed his allies at the most critical moment, which confused Viscount Stratford. Now Viscount Stratford is only sure of one thing. He wants Austria to owe Britain a favor before stating its own conditions. This strategy seems to be unworkable. Your Excellency, I think our two countries have the same position and interests in this Near East crisis. The further expansion of French power in the Near East is not conducive to the peace of the Near East. Metternich had no interest in such empty talk, and personally, he hoped that France would continue to fight the British to the death in the Near East. In this way, the day when Austria will completely integrate Italy is just around the corner. In view of the above reasons, our country hopes that your country can assume the responsibility of a major power in the Near East, host this meeting, and jointly discuss sanctions against the shameful invader Egypt and its behind-the-scenes master France. Metternich just smiled and did not answer. He was indeed waiting for the other party to ask Austria to host the meeting, but the invader? It was obviously Osman who made the first move. Chapter 194 failed to steal the chicken. In the morning light, ripples suddenly appeared on the calm Danube River, and the water waves quickly separated to the two banks. A steam speedboat is traveling at high speed in the center of the river. This ship is the Royal One designed by Franz. The entire ship uses the latest technology and has a speed of up to 17 knots. This is when the turbine is not operating at full load. If the steam turbine is operating at maximum power, the speed can easily exceed 20 knots. The fishermen who got up early were preparing for a busy day on the shore. However, their eyes were focused on a boat that was traveling at high speed without sails or oars. However, they were soon relieved because the ship carried the flag of the Habsburg family. It's nothing unusual for a royal ship to sail faster. They comforted themselves. Franz wanted to return to Vienna before the start of the Five-Power Conference. Due to his participation, the entire Turkish-Egyptian war was very different from what it had been in history. Although Austria got the coveted fleet, will the great powers allow it to exist? And Belgrade and Western Bosnia, will the Russians keep their word? Will the French stab Austria in the back? Will the British have new tricks? And which side will the Ottoman Empire fall to? Franz must know the latest developments before he can make a decision. And at this time, the city of Belgrade could not be compared with Vienna. Except for the Grand Duke's palace and the homes of a few important people, the other houses resembled the slums of Vienna. The city's defenses are very strong, and the entire Belgrade is a huge star-shaped bastion. It's just that in just 2 years, this city has changed hands several times, which is really sad. But before Franz had time to sigh, he received an explosive news just 1 day ago. The Russian army stationed in Izmail suddenly launched an attack on the Ottoman army in Talsia. The Russian troops from the Bessarabia fortress came out in full force, numbering 50,000. However, they were met with a powerful counterattack by the Ottoman army. After Majid reached a deal with the Austrian Empire, the troops originally used to defend Austria were transferred to the vicinity of Talsia. Because Omar Pasha believed that the Russians would not be left alone, and their territorial ambitions were endless. Majid followed Omar Pasha's advice and mobilized heavy troops to Talsia to prevent the Russian army from moving south. Omar Pasha even built 4 fortresses in Talsia to prevent Russian raids. Facts have proved that his efforts were in vain. Talsia's Ottoman army not only blocked the Russian attack, but also drove them back to Bessarabia. Bessarabia is a delta of the Danube River and the Black Sea. It used to be Ottoman territory. It was annexed by Russia in 1812, and has been one of Russia's forward fortresses ever since. The Russian army in Bessarabia was not an elite, but peasants who were called upon. The literacy rate of this army was less than 0.1%, and only 50 people in the entire army could read and write. Don't be surprised, because the literacy rate of the entire Russian army at that time did not exceed 0.2%. The Russian army at that time was a peasant army, and the main targets for conscription were serfs and official peasants. These people usually did not have the right to receive education, and were considered to be a group of people who did not need education. In comparison, the 18% literacy rate in the Austrian army seems less shameful. At that time, the literacy rate of the military was generally lower than the social average. If you look at the source of soldiers, it will be clear. The main source of soldiers for the Russian army is serfs, while the main sources for Austrian soldiers are refugees and recruited farmers. Usually farmers will pay to have serfs from noble families replace themselves. Of course, being able to block the Russian attack was not just the result of the fortress. After receiving support, the total number of the Ottoman army in Tulcea had reached an astonishing 130,000. It would be outrageous to be unable to stop the Russian army of 50,000. Although the total strength of both sides was close to 200,000. In fact, the battle was not fierce, and there were only a few hundred casualties after the Russian army discovered that the number of Ottoman troops was far greater than expected. They prepared to retreat. After all, according to the orders of their superiors, the mission this time was to receive Tulcea, not to fight against an enemy with superior strength. On the Ottoman side, although there were many people, the shadow of repeated defeats and the sense of security brought by the fortress made the soldiers reluctant to fight. Because neither party wants to fight, but neither wants to be stigmatized. So the two sides only conducted a few short artillery battles, and then launched a symbolic charge. In the end, the Russian army left hundreds of corpses in front of the fortress, and decided to retreat. Facing the retreating Russian army, Omar Pasha did not order the army to pursue, but sent scout cavalry to follow until all Russian troops withdrew from Ottoman territory. At the same time, Omar Pasha immediately sent someone to report to the Sultan that Tulcea was victorious. The Ottoman army won a complete victory and killed more than 200 enemies. Majid was very happy after receiving the good news, because this was the first time in decades that the Ottoman Empire had successfully driven away the Russian invasion. He just wanted to take the opportunity to publicize it, so he multiplied the number of enemies killed by 10. Under the exaggeration of unscrupulous Western media, this number has doubled again, and it is becoming more and more outrageous. For example, the version Franz heard was that the Ottoman Empire had invaded Russia. But no matter what, the two sides must not be allowed to continue fighting, otherwise it may even turn into a Crimean war. After hearing the news of the defeat, the Tsar immediately ordered the execution of the generals of Bessarabia and led 150,000 Russian troops with Prince Mainkov as commander to conquer Tulcea. However, due to the vast area of Russia, it will take at least 3 months to mobilize troops. As soon as the British learned that Russia was attacking the Ottomans, they sent an envoy to ask Russia to stop the attack immediately. At the same time, Austria also reached an agreement with Britain, Prussia, and France to convene the Third Five-Nation Conference in Vienna to discuss the Near East issue. This period of time was not enough for Russia to conquer Ottoman territory. After the strong persuasion of Prince Mainkov and Iserlov, the Tsar gave up his plan to continue fighting against the Ottoman Empire and instead prepared a five-nation parliament to guarantee its privileges in the Straits. In fact, this war should not have happened in the first place, just because after Austria occupied Western Bosnia, the great powers seemed indifferent, and even the victim, the Ottoman Empire, did not say anything. Russia naturally believes that this is a good opportunity to expand its territory. I wanted to take advantage of the fire, but unexpectedly I hit the iron plate. If we attack by force, it will inevitably bring even worse international consequences, because Russia's undeclared war at this time is not only a moral defect, but also a violation of the Russian-Turkish alliance. In the end, Russia can only use what the Americans did before. This is a misunderstanding. In fact, a Russian soldier was lost, and the army was sent just to find the missing soldier. As for the exchange of fire, it was all a misunderstanding. Although this explanation is very outrageous, the Ottomans are not qualified to question it, because the great powers have expressed their attitude with silence, and this has indeed avoided an armed conflict, which is not a big deal for the Ottomans, who were victims of previous Russian-Turkish wars. A blessing. No inspiration. I will write my daily routine tomorrow. Chapter 195 News. Vienna. As soon as Franz disembarked, He was put into the royal carriage and joined the victory parade. The parade slowly passed through the streets, lined with celebrating crowds, and flower petals were flying in the air. The victory of recapturing Belgrade made people intoxicated. Of course, the Austrian government also spent money. They prepared 20 tons of candies to celebrate this victory. In fact, the Austrian government did not spend much money on this batch of sugar. They were sent by the Mexicans to pay off debts. Tassinana's level of governance was comparable to that of the two emperors of Hukin. After the Civil War, instead of improving, the Mexican economy fell into depression. Due to successive economic crisis and famine, demand for sugar in Europe dropped sharply, and Mexico's economy suffered a heavy blow. At the same time, the Mexican-American War and the Civil War left Mexico with huge debts, and Tassinana's method of dealing with it was to raise taxes. The Mexicans were overwhelmed by various taxes. However, as France began to invade the Central American Federation, and the Americans expanded their arms and prepared for war, Tassinana felt the crisis, and to face the crisis at hand, he must have a strong army. As a result, the continuous increase in taxes finally led to people's resistance. Coupled with the instigation of some local forces, rebellions occurred one after another in some parts of Mexico. But Tassinana simply couldn't see the crux of the problem. In order to quell the rebellion, he had to feed more troops, and more troops meant higher taxes in the end. Even the Mexican soldiers discovered the problem, because those who resisted would not resist as long as they could survive. But Tassinana himself couldn't get out of this vicious circle. After some thinking, he remembered the friend who had helped him. Of course, Archduke Franz Karol couldn't understand what the other person wrote, so he gave it to Madame Sophie. However, Mrs. Sophie's level of governance was not very good. After giving Tassinana a few bad ideas, she handed it over to Franz. Franz could see at a glance that Tassinana was avoiding the important and trivial. What he was most worried about was actually the issue of territorial ownership of California and New Mexico. Americans and French are constantly penetrating into these two vast and sparsely populated lands. Tassinana's immigration plan proved to be completely whimsical. People in the South were unwilling to leave their homeland. California and New Mexico were not ready to receive immigrants, and the Mexican government was counterproductive in the immigration process. As a result, Tassinana's ambitious immigration plan had to be terminated because of the untouchables. The subsequent debt crisis and endless rebellions made him breathless. Franz sighed. It's true that mud can't hold up the wall, but the land in Mexico is really good. It's either gold or silver. It's just God's blessing. It's a pity that I'm incompetent and have evil neighbors as companions. Rather than giving Americans a bargain, it's better to dig it out yourself. Franz had made up his mind, and just when he wanted Ajani to handle the matter, he found that the latter could hardly stand. The previous parade was a kind of torture for Franz. He had to sit upright in the carriage and accept the blessings of his subjects. What was even worse was that Ajani followed the carriage for 8 kilometers in high heels and did not stop even for a moment when she returned to Schönbrunn Palace. At this time, her legs were trembling, and if she hadn't continued to exercise, she might have collapsed. Go to bed. Ajani was a little shocked for a moment, thinking she heard wrong. Go to bed, Franz repeated. Ajani has received professional and strict training, and generally will not sit on the owner's bed or chair casually, but she couldn't stand anymore. After hearing Franz's words, she couldn't care so much, and jumped directly onto the bed. The moment she lay on the bed, she felt like she was alive again. With her waist and legs relaxed, Ajani looked at the ceiling, lost in thought, and didn't know what she was thinking. Even Franz didn't pay much attention when he went out and came back. Just when Ajani was about to stretch and relax, Franz suddenly grabbed her ankle. Instantly, an electric shock-like feeling spread throughout Ajani's body, making her shudder, but Ajani only struggled twice symbolically, and then allowed Franz to take off her shoes and stockings. Just when Ajani was looking forward to what would happen next, she suddenly felt a rush of heat rushing up from her feet, and she sat upright suddenly. Seeing that her feet had been pressed into the hot water basin. Ajani felt very puzzled, and thought to herself, foot washing ceremony? What does Franz want to express? As Ajani's feet were bathed in the hot water, waves of warmth rushed straight into her heart. Soon her brain was in a state of shutdown due to the accelerated downward circulation of blood flow. Jenny leaned on the edge of the bed with both hands, looking intoxicated. Due to the influence of religion, Westerners have given special meaning to foot washing. But in Franz's eyes, there is nothing more comfortable than a foot bath after a tiring day. But judging from Ajani's appearance, the matter may not be discussed for the time being. Another war broke out in the Chenla area, and the Vietnamese misjudged the situation. They believed that Austria's ability to quickly occupy large areas of Chenla's territory was supported by Chenla and the Siamese. As a result, Emperor Minh Minh of Vietnam did the biggest mistake in his life and ordered the arrest of Queen Anme's sisters, tortured them to death in front of her, and threw their bodies into the Mekong River. This move greatly angered the Chenla people, nobles, and monks. Chenla was a Buddhist place at that time, and the monks had a very high status and had considerable power. Farmers, and even bandits all rose up against the Vietnamese. The church did not miss this opportunity and sent troops to attack Phnom Penh. The Vietnamese side assembled a total of 50,000 troops in an attempt to break the myth that the Scutarii were invincible. However, contrary to expectations, the Vietnamese army originally wanted to take advantage of the Scutarii's lack of cavalry and use elite cavalry to break through the front line in one fell swoop. Unexpectedly, the Scutarii had just replenished a batch of Congreve rockets. The rockets flying all over the sky caused great panic to the Vietnamese cavalry. In addition, the Vietnamese, who had been defeated repeatedly at this time, lied about the fact that the Western knew how to use magic to cover up the fact of their defeat. When the Vietnamese army saw the rockets flying in the sky, they immediately felt that a disaster was coming and fled in a panic. As a result, the Vietnamese cavalry collided with their own infantry formations, leading to a complete rout. In this battle, the Vietnamese army lost 3,500 people and captured more than 30,000 people. They were forced to return the Chenla royal family, recognize the independence of Chenla, and pay an indemnity of 3,000 yuan, 1 million taels of silver. In history, Prince Anton, who was supposed to take advantage of the chaos to seize the throne of Chenla, died inexplicably at sea. Along with his cronies, Siam and Chenla became allies, and Chenla surrendered to Austria. Queen Anme officially ascended the throne. Ambrosius became the prince's husband, and their son was named Prince. However, the Scutarii did not disband, and the church still actually controlled the power, but the queen herself did not care, and there was no force in Chenla that could confront the church. But Franz was a little worried, because the church had taken too big a step. Chapter 196 Mexico Reinforcement Plan. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Ajani didn't know how long she had slept. She sat up in a daze. Seeing that Franz's study was still lit, she simply tidied up in the mirror and walked over. "Ah, you awake?" Franz asked first. "Well, I'm awake." Ajani smiled politely but awkwardly. "There are some things you need to do." Franz then handed her 4 bundles of plans. Franz plans to sign a 12-year development contract with Mexico for development in California. Austria will build at least 4 cities for Mexico: San Diego, San Francisco, Sacramento, and Los Angeles, build roads, establish an industrial and agricultural foundation, and attract at least 300,000 immigrants to Mexico. In theory, these efforts would cost 1 billion florins, money that the Mexican government would certainly not be able to afford. So the old rule is to use justice, taxation, and land as collateral. Tassigana will not feel a loss in this business, no matter how much it is calculated. After all, if left to the Mexicans, it would be difficult to develop even in another 20 years. Mexico was officially founded in 1821, but in the next 18 years, the population of California increased from 3,500 to 4,000 households. The actual population was about 20,000, and the indigenous Indians exceeded 300,000. In the eyes of the Mexicans, California at that time was a living hell filled with diseases, venomous snakes, and swarms of Indians, and in Tassigana's eyes, as long as California is handed over to Austria, he will be free to organize the defense of New Mexico. New Mexico is also sparsely populated, but it faces Texas, a French colony, and the United States. Many illegal immigrants have even entered New Mexico. As for Mexico's current financial problems, a large amount of industrial raw materials and silver can be directly exchanged with Austria for necessary commodities. Austria's fleet will ensure that it is protected from harassment by other countries and pirates at the same time. Austria will fund the establishment of the Austria-Mexico Joint Development Company to help Mexico develop mining, agriculture, and military industry. Of course, the Mexican government provides it with necessary policy and legal protection. After deducting Austria's investment and continued development costs, Mexico will account for 70% of the profits. In order to maximize Mexico's strength, France prepared to turn it into a powerful agricultural country and let it drain the flesh and blood of the United States as much as possible. Mexico was very satisfied with these conditions, but they added their own conditions just in case. Because they were afraid that Austria would repeat its old tricks and use immigrants to occupy Mexican land like the Americans did. Tazanana required that the majority of immigrants must be Catholics and speak Latin. Although Austria and California were not only separated by the Atlantic Ocean, but also blocked by land, Tazanana still chose to be cautious. Franz naturally understands the thoughts of the Mexicans, and this small problem does not trouble him. At the same time, California was developed in Franz's personal name, while the Austrian-Mexican United Company was developed in the name of Austria. After taking care of the Mexicans, the next step is to find an official who is strong enough to take on the big responsibility and loyal enough at the same time. This task naturally fell on Baron Brooke. After the massive gold in California was discovered, it would be difficult to ensure that someone could maintain his true intentions and avoid some twisted thoughts. Of course, even a person with noble morals needs restraint to keep him true to his heart. Franz also needs an absolutely loyal army. Naturally, it was the Royal Dragoon Regiment left to him by Francis II. The soldiers in this regiment were either rich or noble, and they all had a good future. Pairing him with a reliable general, Franz searched around and found that Archduke Karol and his family were all treasures. Archduke Karol Ferdinand, the second son of Archduke Karol, was not as talented as his brothers, so he would not act as high profile as Albrecht and Friedrich. But this does not mean that he is a mediocre person. On the contrary, Archduke Karol Ferdinand is considered one of the best generals in Austria. However, he did not perform much in his life because he was too low-key. After all, his father and brother were too dazzling, and the Austrian Empire was too short-lived. As for the issue of immigration and labor, it is too simple. At this time, in war-torn Spain, there must be many people who want to escape from the sea of misery, not to mention those poor people from the Central American Federation. They all have the same language and the same culture as the Mexicans. But if this made them Mexicans, Franz could only smile. Another advantage of having Austria develop California is that there will be no more tragedies involving Chinese workers. This transaction will be of great benefit to both Austria and Mexico, and will also save a large number of refugees. As for the local indigenous people, it is best to let the Mexican Indians negotiate and live in peace. If they can integrate into the city and the countryside, they can also help. Franz noticed that the shoes on Ajana's feet had been replaced by her usual flat shoes. Why? Did you wear high heels before? Franz asked. In fact, the trend of wearing high heels began in the mid to late 19th century. Due to the development of photography technology, women discovered the charm of such shoes after the Napoleonic Wars. High heels almost disappeared in Europe and were only found in high-end brothels in Paris. Later it spread to the United States and became one of the American characteristics. Ajani seemed very embarrassed. As a Polish exile and former leader of the Polish Nationalist Army, her experience was much more complicated than Franz imagined, because she is beautiful. This is indeed the most fundamental reason for Ajani to wear high heels. At 169 centimeters tall, she is definitely a tall woman in this era. It is the nature of women to love beauty, and they will try every means to satisfy this desire, even cutting their flesh and bones, or smearing their faces with arsenic. Franz understood, but said it anyway. Smelly. After soaking your feet, you slept for 6 hours straight. Why? Are you doing the foot washing ceremony? Is there anything embarrassing you want me to do? Ajani asked. I have already given it to you. What is the foot washing ceremony? I just let you soak your feet to relieve your fatigue. Franz replied. Oh. Is that so? Don't tell me. It's really comfortable. Ajani said, yeah. Then please don't make that weird sound next time. Franz said, then. What kind of sound do you want to hear? Ajani winked at Franz and said with a smile. Franz directly picked up a book and flew over, but Ajani quickly caught it. Okay, go to bed early. There are still a lot of things to do tomorrow. Good night. Archduke Franz. Good night, Miss Ajani. After Ajani left, Franz closed the book. Archbishop Prussia has been waiting in the chapel next door for a long time. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 197, The Archbishop's Worries. It is good to quickly capture the entire territory of Chenla, but does the Scutari have enough troops? The size of the organization expands too fast, and how can loyalty be guaranteed? After losing the threat of powerful enemies, internal differences have become the main issue. Question. Archbishop Prussia, I hope you will pay attention to those potential threats. Franz talked about his views on the Chenla area. As for whether those things would happen, he didn't know. Franz just didn't want Austria's good situation in Chenla to be ruined for no reason. After capturing the entire territory of Chenla, there was another commodity that could be traded, and that was saltpeter. Europe's military progress all relied on gunpowder, and one thing that was indispensable for making gunpowder at this time was saltpeter. Saltpeter was not only an important military material at this time, but also an important raw material for making fertilizers. Local methods of making saltpeter, whole saltpeter, etc. simply cannot keep up with the rate of consumption. At this time, the only saltpeter exporting country was Chile. As for the price, it was still within an acceptable range, but the problem was that the price was extremely unstable. The biggest role of Chenla saltpeter is that Austria can open an arsenal in Chenla to achieve self-sufficiency in weapons, and at the same time, it can also slightly alleviate Austria's problem of insufficient saltpeter. Grand Duke Franz, Queen Anne-Marie of Zenla has agreed to change Christianity. Catholicism will become the state religion in the future, and the size of the Scutari has been expanded to 40,000. The success of the Queen's conversion to Christianity is certainly gratifying. But Chenla is a country, not a parish. As administrative costs continue to increase, it is very likely that it will follow the footsteps of the East India Company, but with the Queen's support, we can legitimately take over the entire country. Chenla has even surrendered to Austria. This is the first and largest overseas colony of the Austrian Empire. Prussia said proudly. Archbishop, look at the newspapers. The people don't care about this at all. And Queen Anne-Marie, how many brigades does she have? In the past, you could use some colorful indulgences to make those parishioners fight to the death. But what about now? Friend? See, I asked. To put it bluntly, Queen Anne-Marie, apart from symbolizing legitimacy, does not bring economic or military benefits in itself. From then on, all political, economic, and military pressures from Chenla fell on the church. These things all require money to support them. In the past, the church could obtain some indulgences in the parish instead of currency, and frantically plundered resources from the Chenla area at no cost. But at this time, with the burden of the country on its back, the currency must be supported by precious metal reserves, otherwise the country cannot even operate normally. We can still print indulgences, but the Chenla people didn't master this technology, Prussia argued. But what about the French? What about the Austrians? Even if no one fishes in troubled waters now, they will appear sooner or later. Maybe the interior of the Chenla church is already riddled with holes. Long-term pain is worse than short-term pain. Use white lead money and expected banknotes instead of indulgences. For small transactions, use white lead money. For large transactions, use promissory notes. Although Franz's answer was cruel, it was extremely realistic. Archbishop Prussia also knew this, but he did not want to believe that those devout believers who could disregard life and death would become slaves of money. In fact, this is easy to explain, because people are social, and those devout believers used to be separated from society, making them detached from the world. However, in the process of missionary work, they will inevitably come into contact with ordinary people, which restores their social nature. Archbishop Prussia went through a complex ideological struggle and finally gave up thinking. After all, the Archduke Franz in front of us is a born saint, so we can just listen. You are right, Archduke Franz. Everything will be done as you ordered. I will send people to clean up those cancers and let them get the punishment they deserve. 4. The stability of Zenla, a divide and conquer approach can be adopted. The areas originally occupied by the church will continue to be managed by the church. As for those areas that have just been recovered, they can be allowed to elect themselves, or Queen Anne-Marie can appoint people to manage them. As long as the language is unified, as long as weights, measures, and guarantees are based on one country. The main reason why Franz said this was that Chandler's territory and soldiers had expanded too much, and if this continued, there would be a civil war. Once a civil war breaks out, all the church's previous efforts will be in vain. In fact, Prussia unknowingly walked into a trap. In the past, the church appeared as a savior, and people would naturally be willing to support it. But once it became the controller of the country, it had to stand in front of the stage and communicate with ordinary people. If you stand on the opposite side, your so-called faith will naturally be greatly compromised. Archbishop Prussia didn't quite understand what Franz meant, but there were many smart people in the church who could answer these questions for him, and all he had to do was accept and implement them. The Siamese have placed a large order for weapons with us, just in case. Archbishop Prussia did not continue. Franz knew what he was afraid of. Prussia was afraid that the Siamese, Thailand, people would use the weapons sold to them by Austria to attack Chandler in turn. This is indeed possible, but if it does happen, it only means that Austria is too weak, because it hesitates to move forward. Today is defeated by yesterday. That kind of country does not deserve sympathy. Of course, this is only theoretical. In actual operation, the monkey version of the weapon is a necessary choice. The human version refers to the original genuine version, which has complex technology, difficult production, and high cost. The monkey version refers to the simplified version, which removes some complex functions, has simple technology, easy production, and low cost. The Siamese's opponents are mainly Malay natives, Laos and Vietnamese. The level of firearms used by these opponents is not high, and it does not make much sense for Austria to sell them the latest rifles. It is better to directly occupy them with a large number of cheap goods. Market, let them give up the idea of imitating. Archbishop, I believe the military will be very happy to hear this news. If the military's inventory is exhausted, you can have people make it yourself in Chandler. In a few days, I will ask Archduke Albrecht to send you two drawings, one for the Skateria and the other for manufacturing goods. But, Archduke Franz, if we use two designs, will the cost increase? Archbishop Prussia said with some worry. It seems that the Archbishop has really seriously considered selling weapons. Weapon manufacturing in this era is still an era when factories and handicraft workshops run parallel, and the so-called factories are just larger workshops, and the concept of assembly lines has not yet been proposed. Therefore, Archbishop Russia's worries are normal, but the monkey version of the weapon is actually a simplification of the original version. The simplest way to limit the Siamese's combat effectiveness is to change the ignition method from mercury, fulminate firing to subsequent firing. The climate in Southeast Asia is humid and rainy, which is an important reason why matchlocks have never been able to replace cold weapons. Let Albrecht go, just to see if there is any way to save costs more. Don't worry, Archbishop. I will definitely be able to give you a plan that can weaken the fighting power of the Siamese and make money for the church at the same time. In this era, the Austrian army did not have a division-level organization. An infantry regiment had about 2,000 people, a brigade had 4,000 people, and a corps with 5 brigades had about 20,000 people. In the next chapter, a new character will appear. It was decided by a vote in the group before, Miss Miko. Chapter 198 The Miko Studying. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. It was only the next day, after I came back, that I learned that Metternich and Viscount Stratford had reached an agreement. The terms between the two parties were very simple and crude. Britain would support Austria's occupation of Western Bosnia and Belgrade, and would also support Tripoli's de facto independence. Austria will cooperate with Britain to attack Egypt's effective forces, and will work with Britain to weaken France's power in the Near East at the subsequent five-nation meeting. In fact, as long as the British-Turkish commercial treaty comes into effect, follow up by the great powers, can ensure that Muhammad Ali will not have the possibility of making a comeback. Therefore, conditions such as limiting the number of troops, paying war reparations, paying large sums of tribute to Sudan every year, and returning areas to Syria, are completely meaningless. The British idea of establishing a Jewish state in the Jerusalem area was firmly resisted by Austria. Although the church was excluded from politics, it still had unparalleled influence within the empire. It was unacceptable for a Catholic country to allow the Holy Land to be occupied by Jews at the same time. There were a large number of Jews in the Austrian Empire, and they occupied a large amount of wealth. If all these people left Austria, it would have a huge impact on the empire's economy. This Jewish state is not an independent country, but a puppet supported by the British. Although Austria will not covet the land of Jerusalem, it will still be on pins and needles to have a bad neighbor like Britain. For example, before the establishment of the German Confederation, Hanover was the biggest cancer in the entire German region. Under its crazy introduction, British goods could even circulate into the Austrian market. This is unacceptable for Austria, which implements trade protection to prevent the outflow of precious metals. Metternich was well aware of Britain's industrial and commercial capabilities. If it was allowed to establish a protectorate in Jerusalem, a large number of British goods would enter the Austrian market through the Ottoman Empire. The meeting of the five nations is scheduled for 1 month later, during which Austria will send troops to continue attacking the Egyptians until the other side surrenders. At the same time, 3,000 troops will be sent to Beirut to cooperate with the British actions. As for the military expenses for Austria's troops, of course they were borne jointly by the Ottoman Empire and the Egyptians. War reparations. Friedrich seemed to be addicted to sneak attacks. He wrote to Franz that he had thought of another shocking plan. The colonization of Namibia seemed not to be smooth, and few Austrians were willing to go abroad, let alone desolate Africa, or Namibia, known as the Gates to Hell. The church's plans to absorb locals were also unsuccessful. The local indigenous people are very fierce and often come to the fields to steal things. The wheat, corn, and even potatoes they planted have been dug up. Food often has to be transported domestically, and they often need to eat seafood to survive. Although seafood is usually a high-end ingredient for us, if we eat this kind of food for several months, most people really can't stand it. Moreover, seafood has very low calories. If you want to fill your stomach, you need to eat a lot. Franz's advice to them was to grow cassava, a highly poisonous plant native to Brazil. But in modern times, it has become the most important food crop in Africa, and is known as the 6th largest food crop in the world. Cassava has the excellent characteristics of being thick and easy to grow, easy to cultivate, high yield, and can be harvested in all seasons. As for the so-called highly toxic cassava, it only needs to be heated and cooked before eating. Let me mention here that the cassava we eat now has been improved through artificial selection. In this era, cassava was relatively primitive and very toxic. There used to be an American survival show about a group of modern people living together in the Amazon rainforest for 30 days. In it, there was a black man who ate raw cassava in the Brazilian rainforest in order to save food. After that, he began to suffer from severe vomiting and diarrhea. By the time he was sent to the hospital, he was dead. Due to the lack of fuel on the grassland, the local indigenous people developed the habit of eating raw food, and this poisonous crop will definitely scare them away. Cassava can be processed into cassava flour and then made into various pastas for trade with local indigenous people. Vienna College has welcomed the first student in its history who can take physics, chemistry, and mechanics at the same time and achieve excellent results. Although it is at the junior high school level, it is amazing. You must know that the teachers at the Royal Academy for Women in Vienna are all engaged in research, and there are not many serious lecturers. It is very difficult to understand what they say, let alone learn from them. This made Franz very curious. He did not think that this girl would definitely become a scientist as famous as Marie Curie. But Franz feels that this is a good start and should be highlighted. After all, as long as the net is big enough, you may be able to fish out something. As soon as Franz finished washing, Thalia excitedly pushed the door open and entered. Franz, let me show you a baby. Long time no see, Thalia. But next time, could you knock on the door first? Okay, respectfully, Archduke Franz. Thalia twisted the corners of her skirt and saluted. Franz noticed this time that Thalia was wearing a costume. This is very rare. She is obviously most afraid of trouble and wants to go out in her pajamas every time. It's really a big deal. Of course, today is the award ceremony. Thalia looked very excited. Didn't I ask Ajani to send those customized medals and prizes to you? Those gadgets. How could you have as much influence as awarding the prize in person? Thalia hugged Franz's arm and prepared to drag him out. You're right. I can just go with you. Why are you holding me back? Franz was a little confused. Thalia acted as if she was afraid that she would run away. Franz still has some expectations for the subsequent awards. One of Franz's purposes in establishing this academy was to cultivate available talents for himself. At this time, Ajani suddenly walked in with a women's clothing. Archduke Franz, what do you think of this set? Ajani's voice contained a hint of excitement. Franz looked at it and thought it was pretty good, but it might be a little too small for Ajani's figure. Not bad, Franz replied. I think so. Then I'll put it on for you. After speaking, Ajani took the clothes and rushed towards Franz very excitedly. Franz realized something was wrong and was about to turn around and run away, but found Thalia hugging him tightly. Actually, many cross-dressing masquerades were very common at that time. Moreover, Thalia and Ajani would also watch their actions, but they would not dare to do it to others. For example, the famous Emperor Catherine the Great met a lover at a cross-dressing masquerade, and she was also a famous cross-dressing enthusiast. In contrast, there is the Red Saber Emperor Nero who understands people's hearts the most. Wait, why am I wearing women's clothes? Archduke Franz, you are a boy. It is very inconvenient to be in a girls' school, and you have a good foundation. You will definitely be able to pass the fake as the real. That's not the point. Wait, you two have planned it. After Franz finished speaking, he got out while Thalia wasn't paying attention. But before she could even take 2 steps, she was knocked down by Ajani, and soon Thalia also jumped on her, and the 3 of them were wrestling on the ground. Aha! Mrs. Sophie raised her eyebrows. Franz, it's so early in the morning. What are you doing? Thalia and Ajani immediately put away their smiling faces and stood neatly by the wall, their lowered eyebrows making people want to laugh. Franz was not prepared to pursue the matter, but Madame Sophie did not believe Franz's words. Mrs. Sophie said, after figuring out the whole story, Franz, put it on quickly. Let Mom see. Royal Academy for Women in Vienna. Franz's carriage drove in slowly, quickly arousing cheers from around him. Although he had just participated in the parade, Franz actually did not appear in public many times. Franz's appearance is very handsome, coupled with the aura of a member of the royal family. It is easy for the little girl to have an inexplicable feeling. Archduke Franz is looking here. He's watching us. A group of little girls were chattering and playing. Some young women whistled at this time, but what they met was Mrs. Sophie's sharp gaze. Franz didn't like the feeling of sitting upright and being treated as an exhibit. Everything went smoothly after that until the award ceremony started. The girl in front of her was about 15 or 16 years old, with long black G-style hair, pink lips, but her eyes were as clear and cold as an ancient well. But what really surprised Franz was her dress. White clothes, scarlet hakama, and white footbags and straw sandals on her feet. Miko? The previous Japanese uprising line is retracted here, with this conspicuous red and white color scheme, coupled with the opponent's Asian appearance. Franz was sure that he would not be mistaken. The girl seemed to have gotten used to Franz's surprise, and her calm face still looked calm. Congratulations, Miss Oshio Shanayan. You are the best student of the Royal Academy for Women in Vienna this year. On behalf of the Habsburg royal family, I would like to wish you the best. Oshia eyes lit up, and it was obviously the medal inlaid with rubies that attracted her. After receiving the medal and scholarship, he walked away. Oshio Sugiyun's actions may have been unintentional, but in the eyes of the noble students in the academy, they were extremely rude. Eleanor Harrington, who was second in line, deliberately showed a contemptuous smile when she passed by him. Oshio Shanayan seemed not to see it, which made Eleanor a little angry. Eleanor Harrington walked up to Franz, smiled and stretched out her hand, her movements elegant and appropriate. Franz took her hand and kissed it. The kiss on the hand does not necessarily require kissing the other person's skin, but Eleanor was a little unhappy. The second place medal made her even more unhappy, but she could only force a smile in front of Franz. The Harrington family are Jews who converted to Catholicism. As the second daughter of the Harrington family, Eleanor Harrington really wanted to express herself. When he received his medal, he quietly stuffed a ball of paper into Franz's hand and winked. After the award ceremony, Franz's hands were filled with cards and paper balls. But what concerned Franz the most was the Oriental dressed as a witch. How is it? Isn't it good, baby? Thalia said with a smile. She is from Izumo country, a real witch. That's the witch. Franz reminded. Is there any difference? Thalia said. What is she here for? Let's study. Chapter 199 The Miko Studying. Royal Academy for Women in Vienna, Austria. How did this Oshio Shanayan get here? I did it myself. Thalia replied nonchalantly, and Ajani shook her head, seemingly unaware of this matter. Franz did not want to quarrel with Thalia. He now wanted to find all the Japanese studying abroad and kill them. Seeing Franz's displeasure, Thalia handed Franz a thick stack of documents. Her identity information is written on it. Her name is Shanayan, and Oshio is the name of the shrine where she was born and raised. Oshio Sujana, whose real name is Sujana, was born in Oshio Shrine. The god said that she was an orphan picked up, but some people said that she was born from a witch and a benefactor, and some even said that she was the child of the god. In Japanese society at that time, ordinary people did not have surnames, only first names, and it was even less likely that someone with an unknown origin, like Shanayan, would have a surname. The shrine master is the highest person in charge of the shrine. Analogous to the abbot of a temple. Shanayan has been cleaning and worshipping gods every day since she can remember. She can only eat meat and wear new clothes during festivals. It wasn't until she was 10 years old that a wealthy Dutch patron came to the shrine, and the life of the shrine became better. Dutch businessmen often came to the shrine as guests and even became friends with the shrine. With the shrine's encouragement, all the shrine maidens began to learn Dutch. The Dutch businessman was also very knowledgeable and often taught the witches some Western scientific knowledge. If everything develops as normal, Shanayan will officially join the ranks of Miko after her 14th birthday. In 1837, the entire Osaka area fell into a famine. However, the town governor ignored the suffering of the people and instead joined forces with businessmen to raise prices and make huge profits. Later, the leader of the uprising, Oshio Hihachiro, came to the shrine and wanted to ask the shrine lord to join him in the uprising. In fact, the shrine has already run out of food, so the priestesses can only eat leaves and wild vegetables to satisfy their hunger and desperation. The whole shrine joined the rebellion. With the participation of witches and priests, the confidence of the hungry people was increased. The rebels fought all the way to the town's home, but when they opened the warehouse, everyone was dumbfounded. There is not a grain of grain in the warehouse, but it is full of large and small grains and silver goods. The angry hungry people killed Machi and threw his wife and children into the cauldron. However, before they had time to celebrate their victory, the shogunate's army arrived. The hungry people only had simple farm tools and sharpened sticks in their hands, and they were completely helpless against the shogunate's army. In order to completely suppress this uprising, the shogunate even mobilized the iron artillery team. Every shot fired by the iron artillery team can cause large casualties among the hungry people. After 3 rounds of shooting, the samurai with swords rushed into the crowd. The rebel leader Oshio Hihachiro and his disciples were quickly captured, and the remaining rebels fought and retreated under the leadership of the god Point. Afterwards, the shogunate's army killed all the captured rebels and carried out brutal revenge on the local people. There was blood everywhere in the villages and towns, and the corpses of farmers were piled on top of each other. After the rebels surrendered, the shogunate did not let them go and quickly executed them. Afterwards, their heads were neatly stacked together to warn the shogunate's enemies. With the increase in the number of shogunate troops, everyone knew that the rebel army had no hope of victory. So the Lord God discussed with several elders, and they used the money they robbed to buy a Dutch merchant ship. Dutch businessmen promised to send the children of these rebels to the Netherlands to raise them. However, the Dutch did not keep their promise and were preparing to sell these Japanese children to India. Shanai knew their evil plan in advance because he could understand Dutch. Shanai and the children on the boat made an escape plan, but in the end she was the only one who escaped onto a large ship. This ship was an armed merchant ship carrying the fighting brothers of the Austrian Church. The fanatics did not make things difficult for Shanayan, but instead wanted to persuade her to join Catholicism. Even more fortunately, German and Dutch are very similar and both parties can have simple communication. If Franz had not changed history, this Austrian armed merchant ship would not have passed here at all, and Shanayan would not have been able to escape. Like others, he could only be sold to India as a plaything for the Indian king. Shanayan was first taken to Chinla, and then through contact with the priests of the Austrian Church, he became more and more aware of Japan's backwardness. Even the medical skills she was proud of were no match for those missionaries. After learning about the Royal Academy for Women in Vienna from the priests, she asked to study in Vienna. Half a year later, Sujiun changed her name to Oshio Sujiun in honor of the shrine where she was born, and her sister's Oshio Shanayan's path to education was not all smooth sailing. Since she was neither aristocratic nor Austrian, the administrators refused her admission. Oshio Shanayan did not give up. She would kneel in front of the college gate every day until Thalia became the principal of the Royal Academy for Women in Vienna. On this day, as usual, after registering at the registration office, Dayan Shanayan knelt and sat in front of the gate of the college. A straw mat was put on it. Thalia was sitting in the carriage and saw Oshio Shanayan at a glance and then heard her story. She thought Oshio Sujiun was interesting, so she decided to play a trick on her. Miss Oshio Sujiun, do you understand German, right? Thalia asked. Oshio Sujiun only glanced at Thalia and knew that the woman in front of him was extraordinary. Her dress and temperament were different, and the men around her were full of awe for her. Guyan, the little girl is Oshio Shanayan. I have learned some lessons from the Catholic priests. Can you help me? Oshio Sujiun's German is very fluent, which makes Thalia very satisfied. Hello, my name is Thalia. Because I was removed from the family, I don't have a last name. I'm the administrator of this school, that is, the principal. Hi. Hey, Mr. Principal. Oshio Shanayan's answer was concise and powerful. Although Thalia couldn't understand what the other party said, she saw that the other party's expression was solemn, which was very helpful to her. Ah. You in the junior high school or the elementary school? Junior high school, Mr. Principal. Oshio Shanayan replied. Did you bring your tuition fees? Hey, Mr. Principal. Oshio Shanayan took off a pocket from his underwear and handed it to Thalia's hands respectfully. Thalia could tell from the feel of the bag that it contained gold and silver. Sure enough, after opening the bag, there were gold tablets written with foreign characters inside. Thalia estimated that it weighed almost 1.5 kilograms, which was a lot of wealth. Almost more than 2,000 florins. Although Thalia was not short of money, she kept it anyway. What about your accommodation and food? Thalia asked. Ah, you saying that I can study in school? I can sweep the floor, cook, and work in school to earn living expenses. Thalia shook her head and said, there are more than 1,000 servants in the school. How can you help them? After several blows, Oshio Sujiun's face turned red, and he said something in an inaudible voice. I can find a benefactor, because Shanayan was shy. It took Thalia a long time to figure out the meaning of the word, and then she burst into laughter. Okay, I'll lend you the money. You owe it first, and I'll help you find someone to blame. Chapter 200 Brainwashing. Let the world feel your pain. I will give you the power you want and let you fulfill your wish, but what's the price? Dayan Shanayan asked. All this, replied Franz. Shanayan's heart was beating wildly. She felt that she had finally seen the god, and her eyes were full of evil and fanatical light. Set the time back half an hour ago. Franz has already read the information about Shanayan and has a general understanding in his mind. How reliable do you think this information is? Franz asked. 7% true, 3% false. Failure answered. Not stupid yet. Franz laughed. If Failure's answers were all true, Franz would hit her hard on the head. HMPH. I just think you will like this kind of weird stuff. Miss Shanayan's perseverance is indeed admirable, and she is smart enough, but she chose the wrong opponent. After listening to Talia's analysis, Ajani felt very hurt. Does she have a companion? No, at least during this year, she has not had contact with the Japanese or the Dutch. As you know, all the logistics management staff of the Royal Women's College in Vienna are our people. It is easy to spy on someone. The identity of Shanayan was also confirmed by the church. They indeed rescued an Oriental who could speak Dutch in Bombay. The monks of the church originally planned to send her to Chandler to become a member of the church. However, at his strong request, she was sent to Vienna. Failure answered confidently, and it looked like she had done some research. The Tenpo Daban used by Sujian is also known as Jiliangjin. According to the description of Dutch merchants who trade with Japan, this kind of coin hardly flows among the common people. It is usually used by Japan's big chaebols for large settlements. Well, I have a general idea. Where is Miss Dashan now? It seemed that Franz was overly worried. He thought that the shogunate of this world had opened its eyes to the world in advance. It turns out that it was him who influenced the timeline that caused this great Shayasuji sound to come to Austria by accident. Waiting in the room downstairs. Do you want me to call her up? Failure's smile was playful. Franz turned to look at Ajani. This guy's smile was even more evil. What do you two mean by this expression? Franz narrowed his eyes. These two guys were becoming more and more unruly, but it was unrealistic to restrain two Westerners with the dogma of the Eastern Court. Do you want to take her away? Take my place? Failure said. Franz shook his head and said, not really. Franz wanted to get in touch with this big Shayasuji sound because he wanted to have a black ship attack and knock on the door of Japan. After all, Japan was full of business opportunities at this time. The most important thing is that the Japanese have strong learning ability and are easy to assimilate. Using them to develop colonies is much better than the black uncles of the Americans. Just as Failure was about to continue questioning, Franz stamped his feet on the ground, scaring her so much that she quickly slipped out. Japan is a country I have never heard of, Ajani said. The land distance is about 9,200 kilometers, and the sea distance is 32,000 kilometers. It is normal that you have never heard of it. Even the entire Austrian book collection does not have many records about this country. Franz said. Ajani truly admired Franz. She had seen many self-righteous geniuses in Warsaw and Paris in the past, but now they all seemed as ridiculous as clowns. Since the moment she became Franz's attendant, she has never relaxed her demands on herself, but she still feels that there is a long way to go, and Franz is just a child now, and Ajani can't help but shudder at the thought of this. Franz noticed the change in Ajani's face, and said with concern, what's wrong with you? Are you feeling uncomfortable somewhere? No, Archduke Franz. Ajani replied. Franz did not ask further questions because he knew that women would always have 1 or 2 days a month that were uncertain. At this time, Oshiyasujin was brought in by Talia. She was still dressed in white and red skirt. Judging from her red skin and faint floral fragrance, she must have just taken a bath. This guy really likes to tease people. Franz looked at Failure and thought to himself. As soon as Shanayan saw Franz, after entering the door, he saluted Franz in the posture of sitting down. Dajiza. Dajiza is a Japanese ceremonial form, which is performed by throwing the 5 bodies to the ground, and is used to enhance the formality and importance of any scene. Originally, this was an etiquette to show extreme respect to people of high status. In the past, when nobles of high status passed through a certain place, civilians on the roadside would also perform the etiquette of sitting down to show respect. Until modern times, it was a very common etiquette for common people in Japan to perform the jezuzé when meeting nobles during the shogunate period. When the daimyo passed by, common people on the roadside also had to sit down. In modern times, it is often used to express a sincere apology, such as the famous barbecue doge seat in Gambling Apocalypse. Franz wanted to know if the other party's knees were tied with cloth pads. You must know that the floor of this house is made of marble. I think you can stand up and talk. After all, the ground is very hard. Hey, Oshio. Shanae stood up. With a height of only 155 centimeters, she was like a child next to Thalia. Why did you come to Austria to study? Franz asked. I want to learn from Austria's advanced technology, change Japan's backwardness, and let everyone live a happy life. Ashio Sajihain said with emotion, and water seemed to be flashing in his eyes like ancient wells. Thalia and Ajani both admired this kind and brave girl who traveled thousands of miles to study, just for the sake of the country. You lied. Franz just replied calmly. Oshio Shanayan was a little at a loss for a moment. She defended. I don't. All you want to do is atone for your sins. Franz continued. Daoyan Shanayan remained silent. Your story is very touching. Even you are moved by yourself. But it cannot cover up the sin of betraying your companions and escaping alone. Franz's voice was not loud, but Oshia Sujiyan's pupils were constricted, looking in disbelief. Now she has completely lost the cold, silent and attached look before. Thalia and Ajani were also confused and had no idea what Franz was talking about. You knew about the Dutch conspiracy, but you told your companions about it and planned to escape with them. It was not because you were kind. It was because you needed them to create chaos, to increase the success rate of your escape plan. Stop talking. Stop talking. Kill me. When Oshiasajin recalled the past, his heart was shaken violently, and he cried for Franz to stop. Franz made an astonishing move at this time. He hugged Oshiasajin and spoke in his ear. The fault is not yours, but those who force you to leave your home, destroy your family, and make cruel choices. Oshio Shanayan stopped struggling and looked at Franz with a strange look. It's not you who's wrong, it's the world that's wrong. It's those adults who are lying on their backs, those ignorant people, those self-righteous leaders, and those companions who are gullible. What should I do? Oshiasajin said in a trembling voice. What you need to do is not salvation, but revenge. Revenge. Yes, only pain can make people grow. Only pain can make people face their mistakes. Pain will become your nourishment. Those who cannot knock you down will eventually make you stronger. Let them all feel your pain. I cannot do it. Don't worry. I will give you the power you want and let you fulfill your wish. But at what cost? All of these. This chapter was written a bit freely, so please stay calm. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.